Welcome to the Worst of All Possible Worlds, the first and only podcast upholding the time-honored traditions of the American musical theater, including performing live. We've got Brendan Dalton here today with us.
I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Joshes.
And I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
And you'll be really enjoying the underscoring of music. This is the first ever live performance of our theme song, brought to you by the man who originally composed and performed it, Brendan Dalton.
Hi, Brendan. It's
Hey,
done. We faded out. It's gone.
Hi.
So, Brendan, hello, welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
The case study we're doing today is in a musical that I think AJ suggested. He decided to inflict this upon us, specifically the film adaptation of Dear Evan Hansen. And I think that Brendan, he just kind of like roped you into this, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
Can I tell you my thought process about bringing Dalton in was that he'd do music and this thing have music, so he must come on to talk music.
I think what actually happened was that I was on hold with Second Stage, trying to get tickets for a show. I was trying to find out if they had artist tickets, and they just kept looping 30 seconds of waving through a window over and over and over again.
On the outside, always looking in, will I ever be more than I've always been? 'Cause I'm tapping on the glass, waving through a window. I try to speak, but nobody.
How did that make you feel?
It was excruciating.
Waving Through a Window is one of the only songs I've heard like at a grocery store. The only other song I ever heard from a Broadway musical at a grocery store was every Meijer in Michigan and Ohio in the greater Meijer market area used to play on a regular loop Rise Above from Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark.
Holy shit, what?
That's awesome.
So I am an actor, composer, musician, and I didn't want to ever watch this.
Right.
And AJ, he said, hey, we're going to have you on the podcast to talk about, I think you know what it is. And I was like, oh my God, it's Lord of the Rings. He's like, it's not Lord of the Rings. And I was like, is it The Hobbit? He's like, it's not The Hobbit, but you're close.
The way that we tend to do things is our guests choose the topic from a list of topics, and AJ is now revealing to us that he
just forced it upon you.
Strapped you down, forced your eyes open, and shoved this movie in
I love that.
He actually said to me, because I didn't understand, I don't know the musical so well, that he gave me a reference in our text thread. He said, you know, all I think is that you're going to be found. And I didn't understand. I was like, I started Googling Found. I was like, what? Is there a movie called Found?
It's the sequel to Lost.
Because he had recently learned about my experience with the Second Stage hold music.
Yes.
There's a lot of musicals out there. There are no musicals for baritones anymore. Like, there are no good musicals for baritones anymore.
We are all baritones here, so we all...
It's
you
like
can tell.
It's so
It's like the last two musicals ever for baritones were
She
Into
Loves
the
Me.
Woods and Passion. And Into the Woods, they always end up casting a tenor as the baker.
Why don't we go ahead and take a step back and talk a bit more about like what Dear Evan Hansen even is? Like a lot of people are familiar with the movie because it just got released to streaming on HBO like 2 weeks ago or something like that.
Earlier this month, we talked about a very sad Danish boy named Hamlet.
We did.
And this week, we're talking about a very sad Danish boy named Evan Hansen. And catch us next week when we talk about Thomas Vinterberg's The Celebration, about the saddest Danish boy of all.
So I think I can provide a little bit of history for Dear Evan Hansen. I feel like out of everyone here, I dove deepest into the deep abyss that is
Because
this
that's
musical.
what you do with
That is-
bad musicals, AJ.
It really is like my bread and butter. So it's composed by Pasek and Paul, Benj Pasek and Justin Paul, who met at the University of Michigan.
The Michigan BFA program in theater is full of some of the biggest perverts known to mankind.
Well, it's
like-
actually
It's also what produced the Harry Potter musical.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. It is known as the U of M Mafia. They really did manage to like make a foothold for themselves in New York City and become
A lot of them are also
pretty
evangelical
successful.
Christians, which is interesting.
I feel like the musical theater scene over the last 10, 15 years has become increasingly increasingly evangelical.
So this started out as an idea by Benj Pasek. When he was in high school, a classmate of his overdosed, and the rest of the student body started like kind of globbing on to that tragedy and making it about them, saying how they were like really close friends with the guy, even though none of them really knew him. And Benj Pasek himself was just like, I also started to do it. And he found that impulse to like personalize somebody else's tragedy and make it all about yourself was an interesting one and a concept for a musical. And it kicked around in his head for, I think, about 5-7 years before he actually started work on it.
In the meantime, Pasek and Paul produced the musical Dogfight, based on the early 90s movie, which did catch a lot of attention because it's a show of mostly men.
Yes, and I think it's their most successful score, honestly. It is the one, because they're set in a certain time period and they can't just do their normal like pop tricks. It is the most interesting of their scores.
It sort of has it's like they're doing a Jason Robert Brown pastiche.
You better call the cops and give them warning. Sound the siren, bang the bell. A mean Marine rolls in this morning on his way to raise some hell. No sleeping us out or keeping us quiet. Try it.
Yeah, and they had a brief success earlier on with a show called Edges, which I think Brendan knows a little something about.
I was in a production of Edges.
Were you really?
At Friends Central High School. It was like a 1 or 2 night only concert that my friend had been putting together. And it is the high school that Benj Pasek attended. He was supposed to come to see us. And we were like, oh my God, like Benj Pasek and Paul, like we're going to do their show. They're going to come. This is their high school. This is his high school.
Waiting for Guffman.
Yeah. Well, as I remember it, and this can only be confirmed by myself, but there was a spider bite incident that prevented Mr. Pasek from joining us on our opening night. But we did get an opening night phone call from him, and I think his parents, or maybe his parents attended, and they said, sorry, like he's in the hospital. He was on vacation and he got bit by a spider. No one can confirm the spider bite, but a friend of mine has confirmed the phone call on opening night and that we were expecting to see him and possibly Paul.
It's a shame that he got sick, but it's good that he managed to rise above to make that call to you.
And you said rise above.
They would go on to win a Jonathan Larson Award for songwriting. And, you know, they started doing concerts at Joe's Pub with like Cheyenne Jackson and like other big name Broadway people. They got an offer from a producer basically saying, what is the one idea for a show that you have that other people will say, we'll never do that? And it turns out it was this idea. It was the idea of, why do we glom on to other people's deaths and make them about ourselves? That is like the kernel at the center of Dear Evan Hansen. So it has a whole bunch of readings. Ben Platt is cast in from reading 1, like he is there. Evan Hansen
in like 2014 or something.
And then they open at the Arena Stage.
And that's in Washington, D.C.
This thing had a whole bunch of hype behind it. So it transferred to Second Stage, which is here off Broadway in New York.
Which I believe is where Dogfight was too.
I also believe it's where Brendan Dalton tried to call and was met with a very frustrating whole loop of experience.
In the forest and there's nobody around. Do you ever really crash or even make a sound when you're falling in a forest and there's nobody around? Do you ever really crash or even make a sound when you're falling in a forest and there's nobody around? Do you ever really crash or even make a sound when you're falling in a forest and there's nobody around? Do you ever really crash or even make a sound? Did I even make a sound? Did I even make a sound? It's like I never made a sound.
Just finish the song. Yeah, it would like
You just play through the entire song.
Play through the whole song and then play it again. That's fine if that's the only song you have. But it's just the first 30 seconds. It's like they're trying. I really believe it's a tactic. They want people to get off the phone. And
they're breaking down your sanity. Anyway,
the critics see the show and promptly lose their goddamn
Oh my God, I
minds.
remember that.
They are proclaiming this to be the savior of musical theater, you would imagine. Here are some of the reviews. This is what Isherwood wrote in the New York Times. Gorgeous new musical, rarely, scratch that, never have I heard so many stifled sobs and sniffles in the theater. For those allergic to synthetic sentiment, rest assured that the show, with a haunting score by Benj Pasek and Justin Paul, matched by a book of equal sensitivity by Stephen Levinson, doesn't sledgehammer home its affecting story. On the contrary.
Sure it doesn't.
The musical finds endless nuances in the relationships among its characters and makes room for some leavening humor, too. The musical is ideal for families looking for something more complex than the usual sugary diversions.
They call it a family show?
It should also appeal to just about anyone who has ever felt at some point in life that he or she was trapped on the outside looking in, as one lyric has it, which is just about everybody with a beating heart. This thing flies to Broadway.
Yeah, I was going to say, didn't it actually open off Broadway and on Broadway in the same
year? Yeah,
2016.
It closed in May, opened at the Music Box Theater in November.
It is not at all uncommon for a show to get an off-Broadway run and then still continue to tour like nationally or do the regional circuit or whatever, and then eventually come back to Broadway years later.
There are a couple songs that changed between the off-Broadway run and the Broadway run, but it's almost all superficial. Like Waving Through a Window was there, You Will Be Found was there, Only Us was there, which is like the big romantic duet hit. It won so many Tony Awards.
At the Tonys, hosted by Kevin Spacey.
That's right. Wow. Oh my God.
So I want to
thematically appropriate.
Yes, absolutely. I want to give some context for the 2017 Tonys because I think it's very interesting to talk about, because that was the year that Natasha Pierre in The Great Comet of 1812 was also nominated for a shit ton of awards, and I don't think won any of them. The thing I remember most about the 2017 Tonys was usually after the Tonys, people are erupting. Like they're going nuts on Twitter. They're saying, yeah, it won. Dear Evan Hansen took it. And it was silent that night. Because the dirty little secret of Dear Evan Hansen was that while the critics kind of lost their minds, theater people as a whole don't generally like this show.
I think there's also something generational there.
Feels very Spring Awakening, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, and like Spring Awakening, it's a musical aimed at teenagers, which is a sort of a relatively novel concept in the terms of like the history of musical theater, right?
And fairly recent, yeah.
Probably the first musical for that really like appealed to a teenage or very, very early 20s, like still in college audience was Hair. And they tried to replicate that success after, Hair got on Broadway in 1968 and just blew up.
Right.
And they never really could. Everything else skewed a little bit older, right? There were a couple of other attempts like Via Galactica or Dude that completely bombed. But then Rent comes along in like 96 when it gets to Broadway?
Yeah.
And that was a youth quake. It was
quake,
insane. It was insane. I mean, there are all sorts of stories about the communities that came up of people just like standing in line for the SRO tickets for hours and hours and hours. And it showed that there was now a viable market for shows aimed at teenagers, which led to like Wicked. A lot of Wicked success is exactly that. Spring Awakening.
I was one of them. I was one of those teens who loved Wicked.
And then Spring Awakening, of course, was like marketed as the next Rent. And then people have tried to find the Next to Normal was trying to be that for a while.
Be More Chill, too, the Joe Iconis musical, which is most similar, I think, to Dear Evan Hansen.
What were you hearing or what were you experiencing with regard to this? Or was it not so much on your radar at the time?
It wasn't really on my radar. I knew that there was a show by Pasek and Paul, who I had I liked my time doing Edges. It was a fun thing, and I knew that they had done Dogfight and that it had been received well. I didn't want to like it from the get-go. I didn't like the snippets of music that I was hearing.
What about the music didn't appeal to you?
It like hits all of there's like this large school of thought that like if it's catchy, it wins. Like you can't argue with something that's catchy. But I just like don't necessarily. I agree with that in that if it's catchy, you've done something. People will remember your songs, and it's got to mean something. But also, like, Wheels on the Bus is catchy. People sing that to annoy people in a car. So, like, listening to, like, Waving Through a Window on repeat, just 30 seconds of it, I heard that it was catchy. And I was singing it for the rest of the day and the day after, just that little waving through a window. And it just feels manipulative.
Yeah,
it feels
and
musically manipulative.
I think definitely as we go through talking about the different beats of the movie, because we're going to be talking about the movie adaptation today primarily, we can break out a little bit more of that song by song. And the song that this movie actually starts with is, wouldn't you know it, Waving Through a Window, which, by the way, is not how the musical starts.
Really?
It is not.
The musical does basically the opening number of Next to Normal, but with two families.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Both alike in dignity, actually.
Which is basically, for those of you who are not familiar with Next to Normal, a play about a dysfunctional family. This is a play about two dysfunctional families, sort of.
Yes.
Not really.
The Hansens and the Murphys.
It's a musical about how the Irish have really had a leg up on the Danish in America.
But in the movie, we actually don't meet the families for a little bit. Instead, we actually start out with Waving Through a Window.
It fits everywhere, and that's part of a larger thing I want to talk about with Pascal and Paul's show, like tunes, is that it seems like every single one is a trunk song.
Yeah.
Regardless of what musical they're being written for, you could take this out and put it just as easily into The Greatest Showman, for example.
AJ,
it would be fine.
Can you define exactly what a trunk song is for our listeners who don't know what that is?
Absolutely. So in musical theater, there are songs that are written specifically for the musical that you're watching. I mean, everything in Wicked.
When I meet the wizard, once I prove my worth, and then I meet the wizard, what I've waited for since birth, and with all his wizard wisdom, by my looks he won't be blinded. Do you think the wizard is dumb? Or like Munchkin, so small-minded? No.
Trunk songs are more along the lines of, like Cole Porter used to do this all the time. He would write songs that were just kind of out of context, write a song, write a catchy little ditty.
Some get a kick from cocaine. I'm sure that if I took even one sniff, that would bore me terrifically too. Yet I get a kick out of you.
To that point then, something that is effectively a trunk song means that it can be easily slotted in basically wherever you want. And the lack of specificity here is really interesting because in this movie, as we open, we've got Evan Hansen, and Evan is played by Ben Platt, who we'll talk about his performance in a little bit, but he is writing a letter to himself, Evan Hansen, and it's about like, hey, Evan Hansen, you can be normal too, like me. Because it's like a psychological whatever fucking thing.
His therapist, who we never see, told him to do this.
Right.
And then we get this song about how he just doesn't fit in and doesn't have friends.
Like there's a part in the song where it's like I'm tapping on the glass and it's cut. And it's just
It also has my favorite shot of him looking through a window at all of his neighbors.
He is literally looking, but he doesn't actually wave through the window.
Going to school.
He doesn't wave at them.
He's also on the inside looking out, which is
It's actually a really good point.
So here's the thing. This song is actually about how Evan Hansen feels like he is a tree. Okay, so here's the thing. In the musical, it's a little bit plausible deniability that the show is about Evan Hansen wanting to be a tree. But the movie triples down on it in a very interesting way. He feels like he's stuck in one place. He's waving at everybody. The shot that you're talking about where he's looking out over at his neighbors, he's actually silhouetted with leaves over him, right? And as we'll find out later, trees are actually very important to Evan in a very insane way, which we will get to.
This is the initial I Want song. This is him talking about what his deepest desires are, which I guess is to be normal, but does it succeed on doing that? What does a good I Want song do And does this song achieve that?
When he walks in, I actually took notes while I was watching on the airplane.
Oh, God, you watched it on an airplane.
You watched
Hell
it
yeah.
on an airplane.
Yeah, because I had a limited amount of time, and AJ said it was good on an airplane, so I watched it on an airplane.
I did also watch it on an airplane once.
Who's going to stop you, AJ?
Somebody needs to stop you. This is also
I've
why
seen this
we...
movie 3 times.
This
Continue,
is also
Brendan.
why we vetoed
You
doing
cannot be
cats on this
allowed.
show.
Yes,
Anyway, keep
ever,
going, Brendan.
ever.
So I think a good I Want song, I think the best ones are specific, right?
Yeah.
Like think about like the opening of Into the Woods, and I hate to do a Sondheim thing here, but like it's incredibly specific, and it's so effective because it ties you in. There's I guess like 2 camps, right? There's the camp of like build something really, really specific, and the more specific it is, the more people will project themselves onto it. And then there's the other school of thought, which is write something that is as broad as possible, so that if someone hears it on the radio, somebody watches a music video of it, they can immediately be like, that's me, I'm waving through a window.
Yes.
If I was just listening to the song, I would not be able to tell you the scenario of this show. I wouldn't be able to tell you who Evan Hansen is. I wouldn't be able to tell you if Evan was singing this song or not. The only thing that did that was all of the shots in the movie. They told me he's walking into a school.
Yeah, because that's the thing that's so interesting about these shots is what I wrote down here is they also don't tell a story. Like he's in this, he's just like walking around the hallways of his school. There's a lot of like shots that sweep around him.
And they really could, because again, the opening song of the stage show, whereas it's him going to school, we meet both families. They could be using that to tell the same story using this song. I think the choice of taking this song and not doing that initial opening number was the correct one. But yeah, he's just going to school.
Yeah, because if you just start with an I Want song, usually musicals start with a place song.
Because what we end up having here then is, again, just Evan walking around. He walks into the gym for a pep rally.
First day of school pep rally.
Classic first day of school pep rally. And very confusing here too. Like one thing that I wrote was it really contrasts this like with West Side Story in the way that the shots are framed in a way where your focus is always on something. And there's a lot of action going on, but you never are like having to wonder where you're supposed to look. Whereas ironically, the way that they frame it up here, Evan is always the focal point, but you're still not sure what you're supposed to be looking at.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's also clear of like the focus of the film, right? The fact that we are supposed to be fully in Evan Hansen's head, and yet by the end, I feel like I don't know anything about him because they've cut almost all of his active participation in the story for the movie to make him more sympathetic.
I will also say that I don't know why I had issue with this as much as I did, but I kept writing it down over and over again that I understand that if you have a shy character, you want to say, okay, well, when he sings, he lets it all out. But I couldn't, he's belting in almost all of his songs in like the top of his register.
All of them.
And he has this one song that he's singing. It's the one where he's disguising his own, feelings through the dead brother.
Oh God, I can't wait to talk about that one.
And he's screaming these things at her. Yeah. And I'm like, why are you screaming? You're supposed to be shy. Like, surely, and so I wanted the music to more reflect his actual personality. And if it did, I feel like Waving Through a Window, there's a different version of that song where it's sort of, it wouldn't be the opener, but it would be gentle and touching and more specific to him as a character. And all of the belting and the riffing just didn't feel like it lined up with who that character is supposed to be.
Yes.
And the lyrics are like that too, where it's like when we see him talk, he can't get a word out, right? He stutters and stammers and, doubles over and rethinks what he just said.
Naruto runs away.
Yeah.
In that one
of course,
part.
when he sings in private, of course he can express his feelings about himself because it's private, but his lyrics are exactly the same when he's talking to someone in song.
Yes.
And that's
even the song called Words Fail.
Exactly. It's a very frustrating thing because the next few things that we end up learning about Evan is, he's got a crush on this girl named Zoe
Murphy.
He got the cast because he fell out of a tree. He has
Yes.
this friend who isn't really a friend, who's an incredibly who sucks. This guy sucks,
Fucking
dude.
Jared.
This is one of the funnier choices that they made in this. It's like when they rebooted Heathers and tried to make like the Heathers, who again were supposed to be all evil people who deserved to die, made them into like queer and non-binary.
Yeah, they made him
and
gay for
black
some
and
reason.
femme. They made this character who's very homophobic in the original play into a gay character who just makes the same homophobic jokes.
It doesn't make sense.
They literally
Which
just change
character is
one
this?
word.
Jared, the best friend.
The family friend?
Family
Yes,
friend.
the family friend.
The one who hangs out with Evan just because his parents make him.
Right.
Who doesn't like him, who's a real piece of shit. This is one of the points where you start to see like there's a really nasty little movie hiding under this one that's so much better.
And it's actually buried under like 6 drafts because the original draft of this musical was a lot more cynical and a lot more hateful. There was an interview that they did with where Jesse Green hosted. This is on YouTube. This is an interview you can find. He asked them at one point, like, can you give us a line from like the original opening song? And they said, well, the original opening song was just a lot of people like being very like proud of their Facebook posts about like tragedies and stuff. And I think at one someone sang about a burrito or something, but yeah.
So Evan ends up in the hallway and he sees this kid who's the brother of the girl he has the crush on, Connor. And Connor's getting bullied. He's being told he has school shooter vibes.
But then he turns right around and bullies Evan. He's bullied and he's the bully.
Right. He's not just a depressed kid. He's like a fucked up guy.
Yeah.
He's a guy who's got some real problems. He has black fingernails.
Yeah, he
This
sure
is Hangman's
does.
Curse.
This is Hangman's
Curse, the musical.
It sure is. Oh boy, howdy is it. We follow Evan to the computer lab, I believe, is next.
Yeah.
And he
so
writes
he's-
another Dear Evan Hansen letter. He really frustrating lack of specificity in the writing here. But the
Why did
reason,
he write 2 letters to himself in one day?
But the reason that this is one of the
Things
things
changed.
about the fucking mechanics of this show. This letter has to be incredibly vague because otherwise the thing that's going to happen in the plot won't be possible. So as a result, he has to write this thing that tells us absolutely nothing about him as a character and feels like a complete waste of time. But the whole reason is that it's setting up the next thing, which is that Connor, the bully, finds the fucking note.
Right, because he has to print it out to bring it to his therapist, who we never meet this afternoon.
But he does say he accidentally prints it out in the movie when we can very clearly see him deliberately hit the print button.
Accidentally
How
print
did he
something.
do that?
But yeah, Connor ends up intercepting it, and he sees that his sister's name is on. He's like, "What are you, some kind of little pervert?"
And he
That's how he talks.
I'm
Alan Wake.
He also writes, Connor
does not
writes
talk like
his
that. He's a
own
good
name on Evan's cast, which again doesn't make sense, but it needs to
As
happen
a bullying
because of what's going to. I love to sign my name on somebody's cast as a bullying move.
Well, that's interesting because
I thought he was doing it to be nice for a second, and then he got the letter.
Like he's just
he was
so
like, well,
maladjusted, he doesn't really know how to be nice.
he said like, let's both pretend that we have friends now.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
so he
and the
signs
performance.
cast.
So Colton Ryan is giving a very good performance as Connor. I would argue it's probably one of the best performances in the movie. He's only on screen for like 3 minutes.
Yeah, it's the most compelling aspect of this show.
Fiercely like underlines how this entire setup makes no sense.
Yeah.
Because Connor's reasoning as to why he gets mad and takes Evan's letter from him is that he thought that Evan wrote it because he saw Connor in the computer lab and knew that Connor would take the letter and then read it and then get really mad that he was talking about his sister. And then he would freak out and make everyone think he's a psycho. So it's like there's like 7 layers of like detachment when truly the obvious easy answer is that Connor just also writes one too. And then they get them switched. And then in Act 2, when you want to drop the shoe, Evan then pulls out the real suicide note. Like somebody finds his actual suicide note. But no. We have to go through this whole shenanigans that Connor's just cuckoo banana pants because he wears has black fingernails. It's like, it's so fucking frustrating.
That was I just had a real issue with the way that Connor was portrayed because the rest of the film, people are talking about how fucked up he was and how he was trying, but he's fucked up. But like,
So
you're
violent.
telling me that he found this letter and like they make him look so irrational in that scene with Evan, and it's like that. Come on, and
Well,
then he's
He's swinging this way and that. He had a heroin problem. Like he.
Do they even say that though? Like
He went to rehab.
Yeah, he
Right,
went to
right, right,
rehab. So I'm definitely, I guess.
but like he doesn't like. They also like just the way that they actually like dressed him and did his makeup. Like he also seemed pretty normal.
Yeah.
Like,
I think that it's in order for what this whole thing to have sort of humorous irony to it, the Connor character has to actually be demonstrably a real piece of shit.
Yes.
And I went actually after watching this and I watched the movie World's Greatest Dad, which is the Robin Williams film from 2009 that shares a lot of plot commonalities with Dear Evan Hansen.
Written and directed by Bobcat Goldthwait.
Right.
Yes.
And Daryl Sabara, who you might remember as Junie from Spy Kids, plays Robin Williams' son, who is just this pervert.
He's such a
the
fucking
worst.
gross, disgusting little freak.
And
he's horrible.
His performance is so fucking good. It's so funny.
So grating and so
I
like.
have to watch this.
I want to show you something.
Ooh, is that one being crapped on?
Happy birthday. It's fucking German Scheiser porn. All right, dude, it's fucking hot, right, yo?
Yeah, well, we're not in Europe, and I don't like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, it's because you're a fag.
Dude, it's gross.
I'd do it. To someone.
Oh.
I would. I'd chili dog her.
Because the whole time you're
will
like,
do.
wow, this guy's a huge piece of shit. I hate him. I hope he dies. And then he does.
He does. Yeah. We'll talk about this a little bit more too further along because it's a great parallel to what this movie is, and it has even though it's certainly not a perfect movie, it has a much better understanding of like what you can mine out of this situation. That's far more interesting. But yeah, so Connor disappears. Evan thinks he's going to be bullied. Again, a big part of this is that this movie is mostly just subtracting. It's not really adding any new stuff to the story of Dear Evan Hansen or to the score of Dear Evan Hansen, right?
Right.
Is there even an Oscar song? Did they write a new
Yes,
song?
there is.
Okay.
It's called The Invisible Ones.
That's the one where they
the
talk
anonymous
about.
ones. I'm sorry.
We'll get
It's
there.
called The Anonymous Ones.
So they but yeah, they don't. As a result, you get less of Connor, and the Connor of the stage play, you're not missing out by having less of him. But you still in this movie want to have more of something different than what they came up with in the Broadway show.
Well, because in the Broadway show, and this is an important thing to note, the character of Connor also serves as Evan's internal monologue, basically,
becomes a
after
Force
he
ghost.
dies.
Even though Evan already has an internal monologue in the form of his monologues.
Right.
And his songs.
Of course, the songs in the musical.
So at this point, Brendan, we've basically framed up everything that's going to happen before the big twist. Do you have any other thoughts about what has happened up until this point so far? Were you just on the edge of your seat waiting to see what would happen next?
I wrote down some notes here, and I'm going to try to make them sound nicer. So the first thought that I had was walking into school during Waving Through a Window, and this is partially not his fault, but he looked like a serial killer trying not to be seen.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And part of it is because of the age thing.
Evan
part of
did,
it is,
by the way, not the character who's
No,
maybe
not
supposed
the
to possibly be a
character
serial killer.
Yes, Evan
Yeah, he looks
Hansen.
very normal, actually.
He's doing this hunch. I get the character work to make him, but also it felt like he was hunching for other reasons to feel like young and angsty and shy. I also noted that friend that none of you like, I thought he was funnier and more natural than Mr. Hansen.
Oh, yes.
Of course.
I thought his what are the ages of the rest of the cast? Because that was confusing to me. I was trying to figure out if they were all
They're
a little older.
All in their early to mid 20s.
Okay.
Yeah, including actually Ben Platt himself, who is, I believe, 28 when he filmed this.
It's worth talking about Ben Platt.
Yeah, I think it's time we talk about
His
Ben Platt.
look.
Yeah, before we get into like the rest, which is
Yeah.
going to be a lot of plot, we should talk about Ben Platt and what they did with
Yeah,
him here.
before the plot, let's get to the plot. He has been the locus of most of the hatred for this movie.
Yes.
And I will say, I think it's a little unfair. I think he more than shows why he should be the star of this show and this movie in his performance here, regardless of how good the show or movie itself is. But they made an insane decision as
Yes.
they made this film that they needed to cast a bunch of people who looked like they could be in high school, and Ben Platt, who just looks a little too old for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you go to Grease, which is not a good movie, nor was it ever a good musical.
It's a good country.
Everyone's old, right? They're like older than we are. They're in their 50s. But they're all in their 50s. Yes. So who cares?
Yeah, no, because it's all of one world. Yes,
right.
absolutely.
It's like you watch Beverly Hills 90210 back in the day. They're all elderly, and it's fine because it's every single one of them. You're not pairing them up with like a 14-year-old.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing with Euphoria, right? Like they none of them look like high schoolers, but
It felt like they were doing a Pen 15 for Dear Evan Hansen.
Yes.
Oh yeah, sure.
It's true. Because Pen 15, the two leads are adults. Clearly adults
surrounded by kids.
dressing like not just teenagers but preteens, surrounded by actual preteen kids.
But of course, that's the humor of the bit.
And
whereas
that's
with
the
this,
joke.
With this, it's even weirder though, right? Because you've got Ben
they
Platt.
try to age him down.
Yes, the other principals are somewhere probably between like 23 to 25, but then a lot of the extras are actual teenagers. So it just makes it even weirder.
And the parents, like Julianne Moore, are not quite old enough. If you're pairing them with Ben Platt. Like there's a moment where I thought I was watching it with my girlfriend and we were both watching on the plane and we thought that they were going to kiss on the mouth.
There's a very terrifying moment where they almost do at the end of the movie.
There's a strange kiss.
Very worrisome.
Now I want to play Evan Hansen.
But the casting, it's worth noting that a lot of this casting decision and just in general, the whole Ben Platt thing is to do with the fact that Ben's dad, Mark Platt, put up a lot of the money to help make a lot of this happen.
Yeah, I guess that's the other strange thing is like we have no one else from the Broadway cast.
Right.
It's pretty odd to have an adaptation of a musical where you get one person from the cast and no one else. It's very strange.
Like they could have, if they wanted to, they could have brought back Mike Face.
They didn't want to.
He still looks pretty young. Like we saw him in West Side Story.
Right, he was in West Side Story. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they clearly didn't want to, or Mark Platt didn't want to. And they try to just compensate so hard. So like Evan doesn't hunch over on Broadway.
Not really, no.
Ben Platt doesn't hunch over as Evan, but he's
Not
just
to that degree,
constantly, he looks like a Vogon or something in this. And he's
gonna read some really bad poetry.
In most of the gigs that you see him in, his hair is either cut pretty fucking short or it's straightened to some degree. And here it's his natural hair. It's curly. Everyone's like, what the fuck is this wig? Because it's cut kind of weird.
Yeah. Well, it's also, because like in The Politician.
It's very unimaginatively made. The colors are bad. The lighting is dull. Everything is crushed contrast. It's like a murder on the skin tones.
Yeah. The director of this is Stephen Chbosky, who also wrote Perks of Being a Wallflower and directed the movie adaptation of Perks of Being a Wallflower. And it seems on paper that he would be an ideal person to take this script, but
until you actually see those movies.
Yeah, until you see the movies. And he is such a, he wants it to be so realistic. And the Broadway show that it's based on is actually pretty abstract.
Yes.
It takes place in a social media black void.
Yeah, it's largely you get the sense that the show is happening in cyberspace, basically.
Yeah, there are a lot of which you could do more easily in a movie, but there are even scenes in this movie that on stage were in cyberspace and in the movie are face to face in person, right? It's not like, for an example of someone doing this very well, look at Bo Burnham's 8th Grade. This movie kind of throws the internet stuff kind of off to the side.
Well, because it's already pretty dated. Like this came out, it first debuted in DC in 2015. And so even now there's stuff on Broadway that just is already ancient.
But the cumulative effect of all of this de-aging that they try to do with Ben Platt is they just make him look older.
Yes.
Look at him in The Politician.
Yeah.
Right? With other actors who are about the same age. And Ben Platt looks great there.
Sure.
He looks totally like he fits into a high school scenario there. Because he's supposed to be a senior anyway. Like he's not like 14.
Yeah.
But here it's grotesque and it's very unfortunate, and it's like it's just too bad, and it really doesn't reflect on Ben Platt's performance. It's not his fault.
No.
It's just a very unfortunate circumstance.
I have a theory about what happened in terms of like the dramaturgy of Ben Platt's thinking of how he portrayed Evan Hansen in the movie, because I saw him in the stage show. He's doing so much more in the movie than he did on stage.
Yeah, he's doing way too much.
And the only conclusion I can come to is that Evan Hansen, the character, died in the woods, and about 20 woodland creatures crawled inside of his body, ate him from the inside out, and then began to puppet his body like a mech.
It's like D'Onofrio in Men in Black.
Well,
Yep.
the puppeteering is interesting because I felt that that's what they were doing with the Connor character in the duo song.
Yes.
Let's get to that.
Let's get to that duo song.
So Evan gets called into the principal's office.
Yes.
And he meets Connor's parents. The mother is Amy Adams. The father is
Danny Pino.
Danny Pino. And it turns out Connor has killed himself. And all that he had on him in his pocket was a folded up note, which isn't signed Evan Hansen. It's addressed to Evan Hansen, but it ends with, sincerely, your best friend, me.
Your most
again,
and dearest friend.
Is stupid. But
yes.
this is because the contrivance is necessary in order to forward the plot. And so, they're beside themselves with grief. Both of them are also, for some reason, the way they shoot this, the parents are talking straight into the camera. It's like shot, reverse shot, but into the camera.
They're trying to heighten the anxiety.
Really annoying. But
heightening the contradictions.
Ultimately, they think that Connor wrote the letter to Evan. And so they're like, oh, you were his only friend. This is so nice.
Yeah, we didn't even know he had friends. He was always a troubled kid. This is amazing.
Evan, for his part, is trying to deny it at first. He's just like, no. We really didn't know each other. And that's when Amy Adams spots on his cast the word Connor.
Right.
Which is huge. It takes up the whole cast.
He wrote
takes up the whole cast.
on the whole cast because maybe it was bullying? ?
Right.
Hard to say.
Well, that's the reason why Jared is only a family friend, because they couldn't have had anyone else sign the cast. That's dramaturgically why that needed to happen.
And Jared's a family friend because on stage you need someone for Evan to talk to. But in a movie you maybe could skate by without it, but they weren't going to change that much. So
because they couldn't change the lyrics is the big thing. Like they couldn't change the songs, and Jared's such a big part of Sincerely Me.
So Evan lies, and he says, we emailed each other, we were friends, we hung out a little bit over the summer time. And
So that's interesting because in the movie, it's Amy Adams being like, well, he had a secret email account, right, Evan? And in the musical, it's actually Evan like making up the lies as he goes and is actually furthering the plot. Like but in this one, it seems like everything is just thrust upon. Oh, Evan had to do it. Don't you see? The mom was like just pressuring him so much. It's
basically putting a finger on the scale so that it doesn't feel as atrocious, I guess, which again, I think has the opposite effect. Like rather than having a kid who is out of his element and starts lying because he has to, feels like he has to. Instead, you end up seeing a kid who seems like a compulsive liar. Because then what ends up happening is that the word starts to spread online that he was a friend, that Evan was fucking Connor's friend or whatever. So he decides to then go to dinner at Connor's parents' house.
At the Murphys,
The problem that I have is that it all feels like he's being pressured into saying yes, pressured into saying we were friends, pressured to coming to dinner, which it feels like the movie is trying to take the blame off him, but also assign the blame to him, and it doesn't really take a stance.
Right.
And that really bothered me.
Because then at this point, we have the next scene, which is him basically doubling down on the lie. This time he does it by singing his feelings.
An open field that's framed with trees. We pick a spot and shoot the breeze like buddies do. Quoting songs by our favorite bands. Telling jokes no one understands except us two. And we talk and take in the view. All we see is sky for forever. We let the world pass by for forever. Feels like we could go on for this way. Two friends on a perfect day.
And again,
Yeah.
this is another one of those great examples where, and Brian, I think for like,
it's the lyrics should be different. And musically he should be having to repeat. He gets halfway, like what I'm doing right now, where he's talking, he stops, he
he's just
goes
totally back on himself, and he really can't, he has to really analyze everything he just said, because if he says the wrong thing, it might get his
like
hands
how we
sweaty
talked
again.
about The Visit last week.
Yeah.
In the scene where Alfred or Anton in that version and Claire are sitting together, he asks questions in this very conversational way. He says, we had a child. That could be happening here, and of course it doesn't. Evan has this preternatural ability to speak perfectly, which should just factor into the plot at that point, right?
Yeah.
Like he actually finds out that he has this amazing gift for lying.
Yes.
Which
so
is a main feature of World's Greatest Dad, because in World's Greatest Dad, he tried to be an author. He couldn't cut it in the industry. Now he's a depressed English teacher. And when his son dies, he starts forging not only a suicide note, but this whole journal that he said his depressed son kept before he killed himself, and everyone starts to read it, and it becomes a bestseller. His son died of autoerotic asphyxiation. He died jacking off and choking himself.
It's a great movie. It's a pretty good movie.
It's a movie you will not fucking forget. That's what I'll say about it.
I think that dealing with suicide requires a great deal of explicitness that Dear Evan Hansen is not willing to go into, because it needs to be a PG-13 show, right? Yeah. And so that means then that you can't really treat the situation with the gravity that it requires. And this is a problem throughout the movie, but I think what's so interesting in this particular situation is, he starts singing, he sings this fucking song about the apple orchard. It was a beautiful day.
Yeah, so he describes going to this apple orchard with Connor that is closed down. It hasn't been open for many years, but he says that, they climbed up, and it's this little pretty song that they sing for like the in memoriams for the Tony Awards or whatever. But
and then there's the next song where Evan, together with his friend, this is the duet song, right? They're writing this series of false letters.
This is the only moment where the movie, in my opinion, really comes to life. Yeah, Brendan?
Yes, I loved the idea of this song. I was like, if the whole show had this much creativity and fun
and energy
and
cynicism
and cynicism, because the only thing that I didn't like was that it's really, besides the end, the only moment where we get to see Connor sing anything, and it kind of feels like they're just using his body as a puppet. And it just really felt icky to me. But if the whole show were like that, that would be different. That would be there would be a sincerity in that.
If it were an icky show,
yes. And they do that thing that you were just talking about, where like they start saying something and then they go back and they rewrite it and they start over again. And if they dealt with Evan's anxiety in the same way.
Composition, and it's not really what you ever see in anything else that Pasek and Paul write.
And it's
any of their compositions.
It's the only moment of comedic anything.
Yeah.
In this, the whole show is so fucking serious and takes itself so seriously, as every song does, that I was just like, why isn't there more of this?
Yeah, they're creating their friendship, so they're putting words into Connor's mouth. There are these great, this is also the photography gets so much better. The cross-cutting gets so much better because they'll put Evan and Connor into these sort of parallel compositions where one is walking down the hallway, one is walking through the library. Yeah. They're driving these fucking go-karts. One starts dancing. There's this syncopation to their own relationship to each other when they occupy the same space.
Well, I also really liked how
it's fantastic.
When the different edits are made to the script that they are writing out the letter for, he comes to the door.
If I stop smoking drugs, then everything might be alright.
Smoking drugs. Just fix it.
And then he comes to the door again.
If I stop smoking crack,
and then he comes to the door again.
If I stop smoking pot, then everything might be alright.
And there's the constant fear of oh no, we keep walking up to this line of making it sound really gay.
Dear Evan Hansen, we've been way too out of touch. Things have been crazy, and it sucks that we don't talk that much. But I should tell you that I think of you each night. I rub my nipples and start moaning with delight.
Why would would you write that?
I'm just trying to make it erotic.
Look, if you can't take this seriously...
Oh, calm yourself, honey.
Which is funnier if the friend is a huge homophobe.
Exactly.
What's weird about the movie is it seems like they have taken all the criticism of the stage show and then learned every wrong lesson from it. They were like, oh, you could actually like make this show grosser and darker so it would justify some of these lyrics, but instead let's just cut it and then make it like this weird half measure. This movie is full of half measures.
So in this next scene, all of that stuff that we said worked so well in these fake letter writing sessions.
Yes.
They do another scene where we're cross-cutting between members of the family, talking about their memories of Connor and dealing with the fallout of his death. Nothing of this works.
This is the
Not a
Requiem.
single
This is
part
the
of it.
Requiem. They say they won't sing, but they do anyway.
And they sing the whole fucking Requiem. Yes.
Should I play the grieving girl and lie, saying that I miss you and that my world has gone dark without your light? I will sing no requiem.
This is I would say the Hillsongification of musical theater. So if you listen to any contemporary Christian radio, you will hear something by Hillsong.
You didn't want heaven without us, so Jesus, you brought heaven down. My sin was great, your love was greater. What could separate us now? What a wonderful name it is. What a wonderful name it is.
There's like these swelling strings and synthesizers that play into the thing, and it's constantly ascending. It's always going up. It never goes down. It only goes up. Because if it goes up, it makes you feel something.
Hasek and Paul start running out of tunes at this point.
Yes.
And everything that follows is either sort of like a weird recitative or it sounds like a praise song.
And I think it's a really dirty trick because this is the way that you can manipulate somebody's emotions is you make them think that you are not manipulating them and then you do it.
When I said the whole thing feels manipulative or musically manipulative, there are certain chords that if you play them, you could play it over a Looney Tunes short and you could get people to feel something. And I feel like every 4 bars of every song in this show, besides that duet between Connor and Evan, do the same exact thing. It's these like sort of bittersweet chords that resolve and into each other. And it's all very sneaky. Because you don't need to do anything. And the only thing you need to do is maybe twist one lyric.
Yes, it hits all the same beats. The variety of songs in the show is you have Evan's soliloquy, you have Sincerely Me, which I feel is like the oddball song out. It's the only comedy number in the show. And then you have stuff like this where it just sits there like a dead fish.
Yeah, I mean, this is the lesson from Next to Normal, which also runs out of tunes about 15 minutes in. And is in an even worse place because that's a sung through musical.
Almost entirely.
Evan Hansen at least has dialogue in it, thank Christ. But Next to Normal just is constantly that kind of building. Like we don't have anything left anymore. We cut the song about Costco, and so we're just gonna have songs about feeling bad.
Yep.
Because what if mental illness is just in your soul?
Yeah, man. Oh, God. You know, once we conclude this, I Will Sing No Requiem, which they sing, some more plot happens. Somebody at school is interested in making a memorial to Connor. Evan's mom, we learn, isn't really there for him very often because she has to work too much. There's like
His
a whole
dad
class
moved to
thing.
Colorado with apparently a cocktail waitress.
Yep.
Because that's a thing that still exists.
And then we get a number that made my hair want to actively crawl off of my body.
Let's go. If I could tell her. We're on If I Could Tell Her, baby.
If I could tell her. This is the number where Evan ends up going over to Zoe's house, the Murphy house. And she's like, oh, but my brother, I wish he noticed. I wish he ever like actually cared about me. And he's like, and Evan's like, well, actually, your brother noticed a lot of things about you. Would you like to hear more about the things that your brother liked about you?
Yeah, they just had this song where he's like trying to describe a normal friendship and they keep realizing how gay it sounds. And then he just starts talking about how her brother found her sexually attractive.
Yes.
It's great.
And this is the creepiest part, I think, of the whole thing.
Because if you were a normal person listening to the lyrics that are coming out of that person's mouth, you would find a lot of things very questionable.
You would be very, very worried. Yeah.
They actually unvague themselves, and for a minute they get really specific about how he feels.
He said, "There's nothing like your smile, sort of subtle and perfect and real." He said, "You never knew how wonderful that smile could make someone feel." And he knew, whenever you get bored, you scribble stars on the cuffs of your jeans. And he noticed that you still fill out the quizzes that they put in those teen magazines.
The Murphys are in a TikTok influencer house.
Yeah,
you
they
just
are.
have to understand that this is how the other half
Brian,
lives.
it's a content house.
It is a content house. There's like no one lives in this home.
Which is funny because like the original Dear Evan Hansen is really a product of Tumblr, right? It's Tumblr psychology. We'll get into that a little bit more. It's Tumblr psychology. It's Tumblr relationships. And you can see the continued sort of Tumblrization of being like, well, what if the homophobic friend is now a gay person of color instead of a homophobic white guy?
But again, like just to bring it back to this song.
Yeah.
I mean, my note on here was, in all caps, by the way, I hate this so much, so fucking much. Fuck. I mean, the amount of bile that rose in my throat as I was watching this horrible manipulation occur. It's like at this point already, I'm like, this Evan Hansen kid, I would like to see him die. I'd be perfectly happy with that.
What Evan Hansen wants in this show is sort of threefold, right? He wants to be noticed by somebody, finally. Yeah. He wants somebody to finally notice him. He wants Zoe Murphy, and he wants his dad's love?
Yes.
Question mark?
The dad who we also never see.
And the Zoe Murphy stuff is where things get really fucked up, and it's where it pushes him into absolutely like villain territory.
It's sociopathic.
If it leans into it, we're in great shape.
Absolutely.
But a lot would have to change musically for that to come across.
But that would make it more interesting, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it would just be the opposite. It wouldn't sound sincere. There's a lot of things that you can do musically to convey that kind of troubled deceit. And you don't need to make him look like a total villain, but you can't make him look innocent, like everything's just happening to him. And because he's so shy, because he's so nervous, he's going to lie now.
Yeah.
And he's going to lie, but it's going to be sweet because when we hear the music, we're like, oh, what a sweetheart. He's just so he's just really in it. Oh, he really put his foot in it. Oh.
Yeah, but what about the nice guys, Brendan? What about the nice guys? You know?
He's literally neurodivergent and a minor.
It's just not. It's not fair. It's not fair. That's what I kept thinking, is this musical is not fair. It's not fair to the people who really do struggle with depression. Mm-hmm. It's not fair to young people who have these conflicting emotions because we're painting it in a light that it shouldn't be painted in. We really need to get into the murk of it. And it's almost like they built a show for teenagers, but also the parents of teenagers, so that the parents would be like, oh, like I hear how sweet this is, how they're going through so much. The music is telling me that like it's just so much for these kids to bear. Like we really need to do better for them. And it's just not how it really works. I will not, but I wanted to see this in a theater with a bunch of fans because I
saw it yesterday. Would you like to know what that's like?
Kind of, yeah. Because it made me feel like the whole time I was thinking, what the fuck am I supposed to be thinking? And I know that's not what they intended.
The way that it's intended, I think, is that he's progressively breaking more and more bad, especially in the stage show. Like in the script, it also explicitly calls out that like there's some really fucked up behavior that he's participating in, but it is that he bumbles into it like a neurodivergent Mr. Magoo. Like he just kind of like stumbles head first into, oh, isn't it wacky? You know, you
could also do that. You can do that and have like one note that doesn't quite fit, playing
Sure.
underneath the song. And
and
it
that's the
changes
interesting
the tone of it.
That's the interesting thing is like the musical plays more for laughs than the movie does, for sure.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't go into that line of like, actually what's happening right now is so incredibly fucked up. It's sort of like, it's expecting you to have the same sort of suspension of disbelief that you do watching like a sex farce or a romantic comedy, where it's like, oh, these characters have gotten into a situation by telling it an absolutely like horrible lie. Like, I don't know, like How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. It's like, no one could ever have a relationship after this moment. It's sociopathic behavior.
Yes.
But you're watching it because it's just sort of a silly way to set up some fun jokes, and you still want them to end up together at the end.
And I think that's what they want.
That's what they're trying to do with Dear Evan Hansen, is like, he's doing some bad stuff, but you know, that's just to fit into a plot.
We're about to start the Connor Project because Evan meets up with fucking what's her name?
Alana.
Alana, thank you.
One of the anonymous ones.
And she
she gets
wants
a
to
song,
create this
apparently.
mental health support group, I guess, called the Connor Project. And then there's
Which is just like, so they're directly referencing the Trevor Project, which is specifically about, you know, gay teenagers who were killing themselves.
No, this is just about like general teenagers who feel sad sometimes.
But then it's just about like getting the orchard open again.
It is exclusively
It's
about
a
opening an
foundation.
orchard
Very
for
weird.
a place that we have no proof that Connor felt anything about.
And
like,
then-
Evan always says
didn't.
he loves it. Like,
That's part of the what could again be kind of a fun gag. Yeah.
I thought a potential fun gag that they missed, and it during the anonymous ones I wrote down, so is every song just sad and painful besides the one where they puppeteer the dead boy's body?
correct.
Now our bodies are the anonymous ones.
Because I felt like there's this moment that they maybe they tried writing a song about it, where they're like, yeah, what are you on? And he's like Lexapro.
It's
the
worst.
And then she's like, me too. And
By the way, I just for our listeners
they
at home,
probably wrote it and it turned out being like identical to my psychopharmacologist and I. And so they're like, oh, fuck, we can't use
Well, this
that.
is almost exactly the guilty ones from Spring Awakening.
I
but
just
anyway,
want to make one thing very, very clear here, which is Brendan is in no way, shape, or form exaggerating those deliveries of those lines. That is exactly what they sound like when they're saying
I'm also
I'm
on those
Lexapro,
medications, so I'm not making fun of anyone who's like comparing like what medicine are you on, bro. But like if you're like they kind of it was all so sincere that you could have actually built some like joy into it and built some humor into it and maybe even done something musically with it. And instead you get another bunch of manipulative chords coming in and she sings this very random song.
You ever look at all the people who seem to know exactly how to be?
in the movie, it's Alana's idea to start the Connor Project, and Evan's like, oh, I guess I'll be a part of it.
Yeah, it makes him yet another example of him just being a passive observer who just gets pulled into shit.
Yeah, they victimize him.
Yeah.
I think that's where it really starts to
Which
really get
again,
me.
that's also an angle for a very good show
but lean
about
into
someone
it.
who just becomes like this weird tool of some sort of like larger fundraising complex.
Yes, but lean into that and
Yeah.
right
Some
to
more
that.
plot happens.
Yep.
The memorial service.
Evan Hansen is standing on a fucking stage in front of a large group of people
Well, he stands
delivering
up
a
and then he
speech
falls over.
Oh, he
He's
gets
so
so
nervous
clumsy.
that he falls over.
and knocks everything down. He goes through his note cards. He gets lost. He goes back to the
awful.
beginning.
Got
He does
every single cliche of when somebody goes up to give a speech and is having trouble getting their words out. Like every,
Also, like,
they
and
throw the
couldn't you
fucking kitchen
musicalize
sink
that?
at it. Yes,
Like, couldn't
yes,
you
right.
musicalize that?
Yes.
Like, that would be really fucking great.
Yeah, but
instead, the only moment that we get, which we never actually hear what his speech was, is because there's no way that people recorded 5 minutes of him singing up there. I want to know what he actually said.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
So yeah, it turns into a Glee scene.
Yep.
Leah Michelle
sure
comes
does.
out from the curtains and there's a camera that does a 360 turn around her.
So he delivers this speech. He's on the ground and he's about to stand up. He's like, you know what? Fuck the speech. I'm going to speak from my heart.
You gotta speak
and
from
he
your heart.
Everyone's
sings-
recording him.
Yeah, like you're saying, with this speech, like clearly he becomes very, very good at talking, and that should be factored into the show because everyone hears what he has to say off the cuff, and it creates a hashtag.
Even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need a friend to carry you, and when you're broken on the ground, you will be found. So let the sun come streaming in, 'cause you'll reach up and you'll rise again. lift your head and look around, you will be found.
A YouTube video takes off with the title, "His best friend died, ... You won't believe what he did next." All of a sudden, the Connor Project's Facebook page is getting like so many more hits and so many more views. And Evan's like, "What happened?" And then Amy Adams turns to him and tears in her eyes. She says, "You did."
Yeah.
And the music swells.
There's a place where we don't have to feel unknown.
Oh my God, everybody needs to see this.
Every time that you call out, you're a little less alone.
I can't stop watching this video.
17 years
If
old.
you only say the word,
Take 5 minutes. This will make your day.
from across the silence, your voice is heard.
Share it with the people you love. Repost.
The world needs to hear this. A beautiful tribute. Favorite, I know someone who really needed to hear this today. So thank you, Evan Hansen, for doing what you're doing. I never met you, Connor, but coming on here, reading everyone's posts, it's so easy to feel alone, but Evan is exactly right. We're not alone. We're not alone. None of us. None of us. None of us are alone.
Like.
Well, especially now, with everything you hear in the news.
Like, share.
Repost.
Thank you, Evan Hansen, for giving us a space to remember Connor.
To be together.
To find each other.
Sending prayers from Michigan, Vermont,
Tampa.
Sacramento. Thank you, Evan Hansen. Repost. Thank you, Action.
Thank you. This is awesome. Thank you. Evan Hansen.
Even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need a friend to carry you, when you're broken on the ground, you will be found.
Musically, it's all very catchy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is what they do best in this, is that they create something insanely catchy, and it's this the lyrics are so sincere, but it comes from such a place of insincerity that it drives me up the fucking wall. And I don't know how it's the anthem for the show, because I had heard this song and thought it was the most genuine thing ever outside the context of the show. You hear like, "You will be found, you'll be found," but it's not fair that the anthem for like the equivalent of "It Gets Better" gets to come out of the mouth of this asshole.
Yeah. Well,
It would be like, it would be like if someone treated Sweeney Todd as though it was a show about pretty women, you know, and like they use that song as the core of it, when that's a song sung by a pedophile and the guy who's about to cut his throat open.
Right.
You know, it's
That's incredible.
well, let me
they want to have it both ways with this thing.
I'd also like to add one more piece to that too, which is that I think that a big part of the reason that it feels so
Dissonant?
dissonant, yeah.
Not literally dissonant,
No,
of course.
no,
not
it's-
literally. It's the least. It's the
We
furthest
could
thing
never
from
have that.
There's
musically
no musical
dissonant.
dissonance whatsoever, but I think the reason that it feels so weirdly out of place and dissonant is that Connor wasn't found. He fucking died.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense for this to be a redemptive message about how it gets better, because for Connor, it didn't get better. Nothing about this is a good or uplifting situation, actually. It's just deeply fucked up. It's deeply sad. Sometimes people are so depressed, that they kill themselves, and you have to reckon with that fact. And to simply
this is an interesting case where I think even, like, again, if the show had been more clever about what it is and what it and understanding of what it's doing in this plot right now, I think this song could play exactly the same way.
Yes.
Yeah. What had been building in my inner life watching this was that you've used this young man's suicide as a major plot point, but you have, that's it. You've used him. You've used him at the smallest level you could have.
Yeah.
And then you get to this song, "You Will Be Found," and it's profoundly unfair to the idea of who Connor could have been, the character that he could have been, because the only thing we've really done until the end for a second is do a funny number with another idea about him, but not who he actually was.
Right. And in the musical, at the end of "You Will Be Found,"
Yeah, this is the act break, right?
this is the act break. Zoe approaches Evan and says, "You gave me my brother back," and she kisses him, and he pulls away. And in the stage directions, it says, "Evan knows that this is a moment of no return," and he gives in and kisses her back, and the lights go out. Now, when I saw it with a crowd of like super fans of Dear Evan Hansen, they kiss, the crowd went fucking wild. It was like, finally they got together. Yeah, smoocher, good. Yeah. That's the act break. So we're going to go into our commercial break. And actually, I have some very exciting news about the commercial break. In my research for this episode, I was able to find previous drafts of Dear Evan Hansen.
I am not looking forward to this.
And
And
so there are a couple bonus tracks that they've released as part of the deluxe edition, right? There's one. Yeah, there's one called Obvious, which was in place of If I Could Tell Her, which is another sort of like, Hansen declaring his love without declaring his love thing to Zoe. There's also a song called In the Bedroom Down the Hall, which seems to have been like a first replacement for the opening song, Does Anybody Have a Map? Which is about how to deal with like angsty teenagers sung by the two moms. This one is actually a different version of Waving Through a Window.
No, it's not.
From probably the first draft of the show when it was a lot more cynical.
That's not what this is. That's not what this is going to be.
And what I will say about it is that it makes Evan Hansen's motivations much more explicit.
Is that what it does? Okay, cool. I can't wait to hear it next.
I've learned to salt all the earth before I even plant the seeds, before they know what I'm worth, before they rip me up like the weeds. I've got a secret inside, something deep that's starting to stir. It's something I have to hide, it's something you can infer. Branch out in the sun if you wanna feel good. Branch out in the sun because you're wood, because you're wood. On the outside staring at the ground, making all the noise since nobody's around. As you grow into the grass, I'm weeping like a willow. I scream it out if my tree voice would allow that I want some birds perching on my perky boughs as they shit as people pass. I'm weeping like a willow. I want to be a tree. I've got so many squirrels inside of me. We start with skin on our thighs. We start to visit our favorite park, but you photosynthesize, and now your skin's feeling more like bark. Branch out in the sun if you wanna take root. Branch out in the sun if you feel like Groot. I feel like Groot. On the outside having such a ball, 'cause I get to be nude each and every fall as those cold winds begin to blow. I'm weeping like a willow. I'd wanna live on a green grassy knoll, and I'd have a squirrel in each and every hole. Lumberjacks would be my greatest foe. I'm weeping like a willow. Can anybody see the sheer amount of squirrels in? If you're finding yourself tired of this forest light motif, then I think you should probably make like a tree and leaf. If you're finding yourself tired of this forest light motif, then I think you should probably make like a tree and leaf. If you're finding yourself tired of this forest light motif, then I think you should probably make like a tree and leaf. If you're finding yourself tired of this forest light motif, then I think you should probably make like a tree and leaf. Will you all just fucking leave? I want you all to leave. It's like all I want are leaves. God, please give me some leaves. On the inside, always looking out, I'm just hoping all my baby twigs will sprout like a reverse Pinocchio. I'm weeping like a willow. I truly think it would be so divine just to live my life as a cedar, oak, or pine. Let my sap begin to flow. I'm weeping like a willow. Can everybody see? I've got so many squirrels inside of me. Oh, the squirrels are nutting. They're fucking
Josh and I were talking about this last night, talking about just how there are so many good ideas here if you're a person who is not any of the people who made this show. Like how well the basic plot of this would work as an Always Sunny episode.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It felt like it should have been an elongated SNL skit.
Yeah, like the gang exploits the death of a teenager. It's
we were talking.
I mean, if you're sitting on her dead brother's bed, she'll have to kiss you because of the implications.
I mean,
should I turn my AC off now? Are we going again?
Yeah, go ahead and turn it off. Yeah. Unless you need it, and then keep it running. Who cares?
Yeah, who cares?
Everyone
Who
listening,
cares?
all listeners, we love you. It's fucking hot as fuck
hot
this
as
weekend.
It's very hot.
Just like some sort of bizarre heat wave. It was 60 on Friday, and then it's been like almost 90 both yesterday and today. Even yesterday morning, it was like foggy and not even 70 degrees, and then it just went.
In the Always Sunny episode where they exploit a teenager's suicide, basically what would happen is the gang would at Patty's create the Connor Project type situation.
Right.
And Dennis would use it to try to hit on teenagers. Charlie would actually get like really into it emotionally.
He'd get very invested in the dead teenager.
He'd like go over the top, like preparing a eulogy speech for the teenager he'd never met, and he would end up.
I wanted it to be good. I wanted it to be a good eulogy.
And he'd end up getting into a competition with Dee about it, about like who could write the more moving eulogy.
Yeah.
And of course, it's written out, so it would be like. Him dead happen. Make sad me. Make sad really me.
And then I don't know.
But then it would still end up being "You Will Be Found."
Oh yeah. Imagine, imagine the cast of Always Sunny singing "You Will Be Found."
Well, it's also Max.
Here's the thing: they did The Wiz. They could do this too.
I know.
Yeah.
We're now at the beginning of what is basically the second act of the musical, right? And as
this whole show just turns into slush at this point.
It really does. Like it loses.
Evan Hansen gets his cast off.
Yeah.
It loses its cast.
Right, because this show takes place over the course of an entire year.
Yeah, and
for some reason,
it's really remarkable. Like how structurally confusing it becomes. Like first scene that we have here is we're at a meeting of the Connor Project. They're like getting together the funds to fucking open the orchard or whatever.
$100,000.
Like, that's an obvious joke. It's such a weird. They call it the fucking Connor Project.
And
they don't play that as a joke. Yeah.
In my note here, actually, to that exact point, was it would be so funny if it were just played as the blackest of all possible comedies. All of these teens who didn't know this kid, pretending that he was the greatest kid ever, and like wanting to do something in his memory. Like that's funny, but it can't commit. It just has this weird like tonal issue that it never resolves. And Evan actually even ends up getting a father figure in Zoe's dad or Zoe's stepdad because, you know, Evan's own dad left him.
There's a lot of early justification, and then there's one like big justification at the end that we're supposed to say okay, that's why he did this. Okay, everything's fine. Like he was just struggling.
Right.
But it's just like that is also not fair. It's not that kind of shitty justification to loop an audience in is extremely manipulative. I feel like it's like.
Yeah. And also, speaking of just details, getting mired down in details, the dad scene I think is one of the most interesting ones, most inexplicable changes from the source material, because in the original musical, he's just their dad. He's not the stepdad.
Oh, they added this whole stepdad thing just because?
They sure did. Well, because he originally had a song called "To Break in a Glove," which is the worst song in the show by far and away. And it's
here's the thing that dads love. Playing catch.
Playing catch with their kids. It is truly it's the plot equivalent of the Bo Burnham pop song where it's
I love your eyes and their bluish, brownish, greenish color.
It's so vague. It's I don't know what dad's like. Dad's like baseball. Right. Put that fucking in there.
Again, a better show would have Evan Hansen fuck this guy's dad.
Oh, that would be so funny. Are you kidding me?
Incredible.
This is so extra, but ultimately what it does, I guess, is it shows that Evan is now becoming more and more connected with Connor's family. And the very next scene that ends up happening is Zoe just decides to come over to his house and goes up to his bedroom and is very clearly wanting to fuck now. And I wanted to say something about this, which is I found it very upsetting because even though Ben Platt and Caitlin Dever are, I think, chronologically like 3 years apart from each other, they look to be a decade apart from each other in this movie.
He's an adult.
It's not good, guys. You're much too large and much too sweaty and much too old to be in the same room as this actual girl.
She's not sweaty enough. I mean, honestly. There's a real.
We should really sweat him up. Like, you know, if they're going to be in the room together, we should really sweat him up.
With the distribution of sweat.
This is the part in my notes where I said the show should just be called Evan's an Asshole.
Yes. Dear Evan's asshole.
Dear Evan's asshole.
It's the second time I wrote he looks like an adult.
Yeah.
It's just super creepy.
He looks older than us.
Yes.
Than all of us.
I was shocked when I looked up and I found out that he's younger than me. I was like, this guy's got to be like 35.
No, they did him so
And
dirty
also,
in this
Paul,
one.
Part of it is like, get her an apple box to stand on. Like, just do something.
He's hunching over and still he's towering over her.
That's not, that's not the writer's fault. Like, that's not his fault. It's just,
it's his dad's. It's Ben Platt's dad's fault.
Mark Platt's fault. Yeah.
Mark, thank you for producing the Josie and the Pussycats movie.
Yeah, we'll be forever grateful for that, honestly.
It was just another moment where I was just like, this can't be happening. Like, this can't.
I know, it feels like a fever dream almost, doesn't it? It's just like.
Yeah. The whole time I'm imagining the audience receiving this and loving it and being like, yes, they're meant for each other. Like, they love each other.
Well, and that's how the
also
song
like, you're like
is
17, right? Like,
yeah, they are 17.
Yeah. And this felt like the most like stereotypical like High School Musical song.
Yeah.
And again, like super, like she's basically said something really important, which is, can we please stop talking about my dead brother?
Yeah. And also, I love you now for reasons.
Yeah, and then they just start saying, well, okay, I guess we can just talk about us. And only us.
So what if it's us? What if it's us and only us? And what came before won't count anymore or matter. Can we try it?
You know, we've been talking about just how passive Evan is in this movie. She has no agency at all. She does nothing. She has nothing animating her, no drive.
Whereas Ben Platt has
there's
20
so much
squirrels animating him from the inside.
Because you have this girl dealing with the death of a brother who she's honestly like better off not having him around.
Yes.
And that's worth, like, they've established that. That's in the context of this movie, and they could just run with it, and they choose not to.
Another thing that really, I just can't get over. I was like, stop fucking with these people's grief.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let them have the feelings that they're going to have about their son, their brother. Like, it just like his, like, well, no, he must have been amazing. Like, he must have, they're like, just don't fuck with people's grief.
Oh, Brendan, though, but they wanted it. He says at one point, it's almost like they needed me to keep lying. Dear Evan Hansen is the blurred lines of musical theater.
Oh God. It's just so frustrating.
Everybody needed to lie. It fixes their marriage. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, well, and where it ends up taking them after that too, with, their fixed marriage and everything, is that
he has saved the Bethesda, Maryland Apple industry.
So then
there's one farmer who's like, I got my land back. Some kid killed himself and now I got a whole orchard.
Zoe and Connor's family then invite Evan's mom over along with Evan to tell them that they are going to give Connor's college tuition money that they had saved up for him to Evan instead because he's such a good boy.
Right. It's another big twist of the knife.
That's the other thing is, like, the Murphys are rich, the Hansens are poor.
Right.
Again, the Danish continue to struggle in America.
Although honestly, Evan's house is pretty nice. Like it's not
Evan's fine. Well, it's one of those things where they were okay until his dad left.
Right.
And then
Mom got the house out of the divorce or whatever.
Financial precarity.
Right.
But like, so they see that, and they see that he's like submitting to these essay writing competitions to get money for school. And so they decide, we're just going to give him that money. And of course, his mom knows that all of this is bullshit.
Right.
Evan has also told her that he's not going to the therapist anymore.
Yeah. Oh, and he stopped taking his medication.
We could have seen the therapist at some point in all of this to make this clearer. It's a movie.
But no.
And so when they tell, when Amy Adams and fucking the other guy tell Julianne Moore that money is going to go to her son, She fucking acts her face off, dude. She's so good in this scene.
Yeah, Julianne Moore deserves more than this fucking movie.
Yes, she
is
does.
what I will say.
Yeah.
And she's gotten it in other movies. It's just
she's
and
fine.
she deserves much better than the song that they gave
Absolutely.
her. Which doesn't even qualify as a song.
But
Yeah.
she,
I
at this
do
point,
need to mention at this movie does all of the singing live.
Yes.
Right. So this is part of the weird dissonance of everything is where you have Evan Hansen singing this belt your face off song about how he's shy. It's like Once Upon a Mattress, right?
I've always been shy. I confess that I'm shy.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah.
here he's singing it live, so you still have to see him do. Which, like, why are we still doing this with movies? Why are we doing the fucking
Tom Hooper.
live singing on set?
It's Tom
like,
Hooper.
it made sense when it was Richard Harris and Rex Harrison because they had to talk for most of it, or Deborah Carr. But like, it doesn't. We don't need to be doing that with these elaborate movie musicals with these insane shooting schedules where everyone has to be singing full out every single time. Like, yeah, sure, Hugh Jackman can do it, but Hugh Jackman's not a human being.
Yeah,
like,
but
at some point
also-
you have to understand he's just like a different species.
Yeah, but I also think that the Les Mis movie ruins what makes a lot of the songs good because
Absolutely,
they just putting
because-
arbitrary bullshit stopping here and there. So the rhythms are completely off. The drive
Because
of the show is lost.
Yeah, the Les Mis musical is not gritty. It's synthy and artificial, and so is Dear Evan Hansen. So you're better off recording in the studio first, especially for Julianne Moore, who's just basically like sobbing through the song.
Julianne Moore acting her face off, declines the offer, goes outside with Evan. Evan's like, but Mom, and that's basically that. Hardest working woman in Hollywood. Please give her a round of applause. And meanwhile, Alana, who is the girl who started the Connor Project, has started putting together the pieces about what's really going on. She comes up to Evan and is like, were you really like his friend, like really for real? And she ends up making the decision to post the original.
Well, Evan proves that he actually was Connor's friend because somehow in all of this, no one actually knew that Evan got the suicide note.
Right. Which again is not a suicide note.
That's what sort of launched this whole thing, but no one knew about that, I guess. And so he's like, here, I haven't shown this to he's been releasing other emails, like the other fake emails, but he just didn't release this one, which I don't know, maybe the movie or the musical could have made a little bit clearer. So then he shows her the note. He airdrops it to her.
Right.
Which again, this doesn't work if they're in the same room because he could just show her his phone.
Yes.
Right.
And that way she wouldn't have it. Like, he's like, here,
he
you can read it, and it's
to
right
her
again.
because he wants to prove just how legit he is. Again, it shows how awful he is, and something that's better than this could have gotten more mileage out of it.
And she makes the extremely strange and questionable decision to post that letter to the Connor Project Instagram page in order to get them to their fundraising threshold.
Get more money for the Kickstarter, because even though You Will Be Found became a national movement and got like TV press and shit, they still don't have enough money to save the orchard.
Yeah, they're at 75,000. They need 100,000, and it's not even a Kickstarter. Like, there's no in the musical. There's a ticking clock because the Kickstarter's going to run out. They're not going to get all their funding if they don't get 100%. But because this is just hosted on a website, like, there's no timeline.
Right.
Yeah,
really.
This is the Walter White Cancer Recovery Fund that Walter Jr. made.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And they haven't called up Bob Odenkirk to goose the numbers.
None of this makes sense. I just want to underscore just how nonsensical this is.
The note, that note from the beginning that is thought to be the suicide note. She posts that online, and then everyone starts to bully the parents because they're like, how they must have been a terrible family because he wrote his suicide note to his friend instead.
Which also doesn't make sense.
There's nothing in the letter that damns the family at all. There's nothing there saying, I hate my parents. It says he doesn't understand his sister, but I mean, why would you take that to be like, let's get our pitchforks and dox these people, which they do. They end up doxing the Murphys.
That could have been just fixed in like tweaking the letter a little bit.
Right.
Like, and my family, my
Right, because
family.
Evan has a bad relationship with his dad,
Yes.
who left.
Right.
And they could have had something in there. there.
Because how could something that vague?
It's
then
nonsense.
Yeah, so the
millions of
family's
people?
life gets ruined.
My question is, how did Alana put it together before Evan's mom? Because she knew the timeline of when, and the whole thing is the timeline of, well, you didn't have a cast in
June when you said that you
September.
went to the orchard and then you had a
Yes.
cast in September. You just had a cast for 3 months.
How does Julianne Moore not put that together before Alana? I don't understand.
She's not reading the emails or the letters because she actually doesn't know that he even knew Connor.
She's working so much that she is only getting like the vaguest information about what's going on.
But they have a conversation. They have a conversation where he's like, no, he took me to the...
Right,
but
and
it's the
that's
orchard.
after they meet with... Yeah,
No, but you're right, Brendan, because the more specific and the more realistic you get in this show, the more you make it that realistic, the more confusing it gets because it actually doesn't really make sense in a realistic terms. Like when you see it on stage, you can forgive it because time is passing. There's a lot of like other shit going on, so you're distracted from it. But when you put it in these very realistic terms in the confines of this movie, it falls apart entirely.
Yeah, I think that's a good point though about like the difference between the stage versus the screen is that when you are putting something up on stage, you can be forgiven for a lot more due to the fact that the stage allows you to fill in the blanks in a way that film does not. Yeah. Film requires that the choices that you make be reasonably explicit and reasonably literal, whereas in stage, you have the ability to create something that can hit different people in different ways, and each of those different interpretations with the information that you fill into the blanks from your own personal lived experience, regardless of what you pull in, those different interpretations can be seen as equally valid. That's not the case with movies.
So Evan ends up going to the Murphy house. Like he just mostly spends his time there now, fucking the dad. And
keep fucking
the whole family
That's
is like
how you break in a glove.
is falling apart. They're like falling apart overnight. They're in worse shape than they were when Connor killed himself.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a catastrophe, and he finally...
This is when he admits that he wrote the letter and that he had lied about everything, and he sings a song called Words Fail.
He says words fail, so I won't say anything. And then he does.
And then he keeps singing.
Like he just keeps going. It's like the I will sing no requiem, but you do. And it's this whole, I really thought that could have just been like a 3-sentence speech.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and because what does it do musically?
Nothing. It's a bumbling, rambling song, which you could have had those earlier in the show and it would have been really effective, like a patter song
or like a
that.
return to it. Like, so if you start with patter songs and he gets more confident, when words fail, finally he goes back into his shell again.
Exactly.
Could have been interesting.
You could have the beginning of phrases and then he peters out and then the music finishes, but he doesn't. But instead, it just sounds like they were trying to do a sort of Sondheim, Jason Robert Brown sort of like conversational operatic sort of thing. And it's so annoying and it's so unbelievable. I really was like, shut up, just words fail. So listen to yourself.
To make an entire song about basically the phrase, I don't know what to say, is an impossibly difficult task that they've set for themselves. And I think it really only gets going after Evan goes back to the woods, after the Murphys are like, get the fuck out of our house.
So throughout this movie, we've seen these shots of Evan climbing the tree at the time where he broke his arm, and you always see him grab this one branch as he's climbing that breaks, and he falls and breaks his arm. So now he's run out into the woods, he's crying, and he's climbing the tree. You see like the flashback of him doing it, and this time you don't see the branch break. So I guess Evan has been lying to himself in his mind about what he did on that tree on that day.
Yeah, and he finally faces it.
It turns out that, Evan Hansen also tried to kill himself by climbing a tree
and jumping out of it. A classic suicide by tree scenario.
Which, again, if you're making a dark comedy and you have a character who's really bad at killing himself.
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
Like that's a gag towards the end of A Little Night Music.
Yeah.
You have Henrik going out there and there are these really tall trees and he has a rope tied in a noose and he keeps trying to throw it over the branches and he can't reach them because they're so high.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Well, this is what felt like I could feel it coming. Like I knew with all the flashbacks, I was like, he tried to kill himself. Obviously, this will be a reveal. And this is like, we just, we're expecting, I think the writers were expecting this revelation to sort of be like, oh, well, that explains it. Like, we can't be mad at Evan. Like, we can't be upset with him because he tried to kill himself. And it just doesn't
It's weird because you
work.
kind of assume it up until that point.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, oh, we're supposed to be surprised that he tried to kill
But also
himself.
that doesn't excuse anything he's done.
No.
It doesn't excuse anything.
Not only does it not excuse it, it doesn't even explain it. It does not add anything.
It just makes him and Connor to be more mirror images of each other. But also, and that's
But
the
they're
thing.
not.
No, but that's the thing, is that the writers in every single interview always talk about how he and Connor are mirror images.
They're just saying that like all people who struggle with depression and all people who try to commit suicide are the same. That's like,
yeah.
That's
they're not
fundamental
similar. Like, I mean, you can maybe say that maybe they get to that point because Evan does so much fucked up stuff, but clearly the show doesn't think that what Evan does is really all that fucked up.
Exactly.
It's just a bad situation he got himself in.
Yeah, and
it's
Evan's
like a
also
really
not
sad
violent.
episode of Seinfeld or something.
I tried to throw myself out of a tree.
So
she said she was going to give me the scholarship. I couldn't say no.
So after we learn through flashback,
hey Murphys, how's it going?
That the fall was, that attempted suicide by tree. Evan goes back home.
Like the tree doesn't even fall on him. Like I would have loved it.
He doesn't try to hang himself. He tries to just jump off the tree. That is such a funny setup. It's gold, honestly. It's brilliant.
Well, and they say
Jerry,
a lot.
know how good it is.
It's gold, Jerry, gold. It's they set it up throughout the show too that he keeps talking about how he fell out of a tree, and everyone's like, well, that's the saddest thing I've ever heard. And they do it twice. And then when he goes to finally confront his mom, and she says, you tried to kill yourself? Well, like you fell out of a tree? He goes, yeah. She doesn't say that's the saddest thing I've ever heard, because that moment can't be funny. Because they think that it's because it's suicide, we as humans, the way we mostly deal with that shit is by trying to laugh it off or by trying to like make a joke. Yeah. And they just like, no, but it's serious. It's so serious. We have to be so serious in this moment. So she sings a song that sounds like she's been given a severe head wound.
Oh, God.
And can only describe things in terms of how big they are.
Yeah.
It's just like, there's a real insight there where it's like a lot of things that happen when you're a teenager seem pretty big.
Yes.
And then in the rear view mirror, they end up not being all that important.
Yeah.
That does not apply to this current situation
at all. No, this is gonna haunt this boy.
Things that look very small and very significant in the rearview mirror would be, for instance, the time in high school that I could no longer contain I was driving with a girl who I liked, or she was driving actually, and I could no longer contain my emotions, and I just straight up told her that I loved her. That was, first of all, I forgot about this. I only actually learned about this fairly recently when she was talking. She was like, do you remember that time that like I was driving and you randomly told me that you loved me? And I was like, no. Oh no, I'm so sorry.
And then it's like 30 minutes left before you get home.
It wasn't not that situation.
You just have to sit there.
So fucking funny.
She
anyway,
turned up bop on the radio.
But like it's that, right? Like that's funny. That's really funny.
Yes.
And so very much not what this is. If I had a kid and I learned that my kid had been doing this shit, I would be fundamentally afraid of my kid in that moment because it is so sociopathic.
But Josh, he tried to throw himself out of a tree.
Yeah, I know.
So,
I know.
I mean, we can't blame him for anything. So in the musical, we wrap up pretty quickly after this. We go to the final scene. But in the movie, they've added some stuff to make Evan more accountable.
He records.
For his actions.
He records an apology video. He does a notes app apology.
Yeah, and I actually
and then he does this thing where he tries to sort of hunt down more about Connor's life, and he tries to find friends of Connor's, and then he finds someone who was in rehab with them.
Yes,
who. Then he's able to get like this video of Connor singing a song, because it turns out Connor's parents never heard him play his guitar or sing, so they finally get to see that. We still don't actually learn anything about him.
Yeah, well, we learned about his favorite books. Oh, Brian, we learned about his favorite books. One of which,
so Evan reads Ready Player One.
None of this redeems him at all, and I feel like the whole intention of this is to redeem him a little bit.
Yeah.
And I do also just want to talk about Julianne Moore's song really fast.
Yes. Yeah.
I was going through a bout of turbulence at this time on the plane. And this song happened. And I just got so angry because if you write a bad lyric and you're like, I can't find, I'm just going to put it in. Like, if you do it, you either rewrite it later through edits, or you hide it within like a better rhyme or something. You make it like a sort of like a throw off sort of thing. You just shouldn't do it. But if you do it, that's the way you do it. You hide it. You bury it.
Yeah.
You don't take it and you make it the refrain of your song and you repeat it again and again and again. The house felt so big and I felt so small. And then you repeat it. And then again, your mom isn't going anywhere. Your mom is staying right here. And then she repeats that again.
No matter what.
And it's this idea of like, well,
where and here don't even rhyme.
It's just this idea that like in musical theater, or maybe just in general, if you repeat something simple, it will carry strength and weight.
Yes.
And it just
ravishingly bittersweet, a marvelous score by Benj Pasek and Justin Paul, and an equally accomplished book by Stephen Levinson. Peter Marks, Washington Post.
So here's what I think it is, right? I think that there is in musical theater nowadays this increased feeling that like there's too much complexity. If you have too much complexity, it takes away from the ability to process things in a simple and straightforward way. Therefore, what you ought to do is simplify and really also kind of dumb it down, because when you are in your most vulnerable moment in particular, that is when you sort of regress to being a more simplified version of yourself. The problem is, first of all, that's not true. It is true that maybe you are processing emotions in a way that is very overwhelming, but it's not going to cause your language necessarily to revert to something that is, lower and less complicated. But also it creates something incredibly unsatisfying for the viewer, because you're like, do you think that I'm stupid? Like, are you saying this to me in this way? Are you singing this to me in this way right now because you think I'm a fucking moron? Because that's what I'm feeling right now. I feel condescended to.
It's also, the problem with it is that the song takes place in the past tense. It's about something that happened, not that something is happening actively.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's that thing that like in theater school, they're like, do monologues that take place in the present tense. Don't do story monologues about like, I was walking down the highway and he came out. It's like, you want to find something.
That's my favorite monologue.
How dare you use my work on the show without my permission, Brendan?
I think an instructive contrast to this is a lot of the stuff in Fun Home. I think this is them trying to do what Janine Tesori successfully accomplished in Fun Home, specifically Michael Service's numbers in Fun Home.
Yes.
Where, yes, there is a certain strip back simplicity to what he is doing and saying, but it doesn't take his character and flatten it. It helps you understand that everything that is going on is A, an active struggle that is happening in his mind right now, and B, stems from the natural complexity of the character that we already know. Yeah. We still know nothing at the end of this show about Evan's mom, other than that she is busy and she is sad about the time that their dad left.
And she's rightfully pissed at him for trying to take a scholarship from someone else and by basically shitting on her for not making enough money or being around enough. And I don't know why, but the truck thing really bothers me.
There's not another truck in the driveway. Well, she's speaking to him like he's a 3-year-old.
Is it because they want us to think that he is also autistic? This is a genuine question.
Well, okay. So that's interesting because when my partner watched this, they were like, it feels a little offensive, and I don't know. I don't think it was an explicit intent on the part of the creators.
There is this whole they name the medications that he's currently on, but they're very vague about what his deal is.
They didn't name the vaccines that he got.
Oh boy.
Fucking, I saw Right Said Fred, which is like one of the leaders in the anti-vax movement.
Oh
these
no,
days.
they are.
Yes,
them and fucking.
Apparently, they're too sexy for their immunity. But they posted this thing that's like, the AstraZeneca vaccine contained pieces of a chimpanzee adenovirus, and now people are getting monkeypox.
It really makes you think.
And for whatever reason, the thing that stuck with me on that, there's a million things going on there, right? It's baby shoes never worn, but it's the thing for me that really got me is like, no one got the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Right, because it got pulled off the market after like a month.
Man, there's no juice to this one. You got no juice. Speaking of no juice, this show has run out of juice.
Yes.
There are still no We've had like 5 songs now in the second half, and none of them are tunes.
And somehow
none
it's
of them
still not
do
over.
anything.
How is it not over yet?
Evan Hansen then sends a copy of Connor's playing guitar to the Murphys, to Alana, and then inexplicably to Jared, who has just vanished from the movie pretty much up until this point. In the musical, he's a little bit more involved with the Connor project. He's actively selling merchandise with Connor's face on it to make a quick buck. He's a lot more despicable in the play, but in like a fun, I guess, kind of way.
I mean, it's definitely more fun than what he is in the movie, for sure. Like, he's an active piece of shit. And there's something kind of nice about that, I think.
Yeah, and Evan calls him out being like, you always hang out with me. If we're not friends, then why do you hang out with me? It's because you don't have a friend. He's like, well, fuck you, man. And then he joins the number of telling Evan to go fuck himself. But then he also disappears from the musical entirely. And we finally end up with Zoe agreeing to meet up with Evan Hansen in the middle of the Connor Murphy Memorial Orchard.
Yeah, so again, a year has passed since the start of this show.
Her hair is longer to show that time has passed.
He's out of school.
We've made it to the purple summer.
He's taking a gap year.
Working at Pottery Barn.
They have a conversation.
She's like, thank you for fixing my parents' marriage. Our family's never been stronger. Also, fuck you forever. Goodbye.
She doesn't even say fuck you forever. She just says, like, I wish that, things could have been different is basically all it comes down to. Like,
I don't think he deserves to ever see her again. I think I just like lean into the consequences. Like, and it doesn't lean into the consequences. He gets to have a final conversation with this girl that he loved, and she loved him under totally false pretenses. So she actually has no idea who he is.
Yeah.
So like she's agreeing to go meet someone she actually has never met before.
Yeah.
And then he gets to feel good that he's like, okay, well, she, it's over, but she cares, and I'm doing better, and I've made things right with their family. I got to fuck with their grief, and it worked.
Yeah, and you know what? It was all on part of my journey, and I'm better now. So.
Exactly.
Because I read Ready Player One now.
Can somebody help me understand what this line means that Zoe says?
Yes.
I wish we could have met now, today, for the very first time. What does that mean?
That they didn't have, well, they are technically, as Brendan said, they are meeting technically like for the first time today. But it was just like, I wish things could have been, I mean, that's just, I wish things could have been different.
They were destined for each other. He just fucked it up by the whole, manipulating her brother's suicide.
But like, is that what that means?
Yeah.
Like, what does that
otherwise,
mean?
they would have been perfect for each other.
Yeah, they have so much in common. Like, yeah. So anyway,
they both don't have personalities, and they're in the same show.
It's supposed to all of a sudden be some weird like Romeo and Juliet type
star-crossed lovers.
Like it's just never, ever demonstrated. They try to do it, and that only us.
For a moment in the darkness.
It's just terrible. It doesn't make sense. It's like, well, you wish that you met what she should have said was, I liked you. I thought I liked you. And then I met the real you. And I think you have a lot of work to do on yourself. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what she said instead was, I think you're a really great guy underneath that really, 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 really shitty thing you did to my entire family and to our entire school and to the memory of my dead brother.
But it's also a thing that we really secretly wanted. So, you know.
But, you know,
yeah,
what I think is interesting about this conversation, too, is I certainly know that at one point, like, I don't know if this is something that all teenage boys have done. I feel like it's a thing that a lot of writerly teenage boys have done. AJ, I bet you did this at some point, is to write a story where you imagine meeting a really, really, like, and it's not you, it's like a different character that is basically a self-insert, meeting like a really hot girl and then like not being able to date her for whatever reason.
Oh yeah, no, I'm a narcissist. So what happened with me is that I wrote a play that was about all of my past relationships. And I did not put in a stand-in character for me. It was just me because I thought that would be interesting enough. It is the worst thing I've ever written. And we don't talk about things that seem big and small. At the time, it felt like it was going to change the world.
Right.
And
but that's kind of what I'm saying, right? Is I feel like this is so adolescent. Like
he made them all ducks. It was weird.
yeah.
I'm surprised.
All characters in all my plays are ducks.
I'm surprised that this last scene in this show was written by a grown-ass man, but feels like it is fully, in every regard, adolescent fantasy, down to the way that she speaks, the way that she's dressed, the way that he talks to her, the way that she talks to him, the whole fucking thing.
You know, one of the things they were mostly concerned about when making this was like that, you know, they said, oh, teens can smell bullshit from a mile off. Like, you know, if you're doing something untruthful on stage, they'll be the first ones to go, that's untruthful. And I think to a certain extent that's true because they're humans and, you know, most humans are pretty good bullshit detectors. But teenagers have a hard time differentiating the truth from what they want to be true.
Especially the kinds of teenagers who go to Broadway shows.
Yes.
Right. It's like, yeah, this is a show for theater kids. This isn't like something that's trying to reach most teenagers.
I think what the actual quote should be is that teenagers can smell bullshit when they're attending a theater for young audiences performance, not when they're attending Spring Awakening or Dear Evan Hansen. I think because I've been in many theater for young audience shows where they definitely smell bullshit.
The level of manipulation that they can potentially be subject to is dependent on the production quality of the show.
If teenagers can smell bullshit, then Glee would not have been running for 7 seasons.
Exactly.
So fine in its craft and rich in its themes that, like the best works of any genre, it rewards being seen again and again. Jesse Green, New York Magazine. So let's talk about mental health, shall we?
Well, before we do that, let's just talk about how this whole thing closes out, which is Evan writes himself one last letter. It's gonna be a good day. And this time he really believes it. And that is him affirming his mental health. So yeah, let's get into mental health. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, well, the final shot of this movie is Evan looking out on the orchard that Connor couldn't give 3 shits about, and being at peace. You know, the sky is blue, limitless possibilities. The shot looks terrible. Like, the green looks like muddied and like
this
not
whole
optimistic.
Movie just looks
it's an ugly movie.
It's
really ugly movie.
It looks like it's under fluorescent light, even in daylight.
Right as the camera pans out, 3 squirrels escape out of Ben Platt, and he has to like shove them back inside. It's just not to reveal his dark evil secret. It's Meet Dave.
Who is this for?
I don't know. That's not even for me.
Dave was for nobody.
It was sure. It was barely for Eddie Murphy.
Hey, did you like Norbit? Here's a worse movie.
This will get us back on track. Let's just
mental health.
Dive into the abyss. Mental health. Okay, so Evan Hansen is able to cure his mental health through popularity.
Yeah.
About midway through Act 2 of this movie, he stops taking his meds. He stops going to therapy, but he feels good because he doesn't need them anymore. He's instantly cured. And you think that there's going to be some comeuppance for this? That surely he's going to have like a backslide at some point, and his mom will be like, "Well, did you stop taking your meds?" He'd be like, "Oh yeah, I stopped taking my meds. Like, we should probably take your meds again." But no, in fact, he's just kind of cured now, I guess. He doesn't return to them ever in the course of the musical or the movie. And that's all, you know, that's fine. I mean, at the end of the day, it's irresponsible, but like plenty of other properties have done it. I think that the place that Dear Evan Hansen is the most egregious, and we've brought it up a couple times before already in the podcast, is in its depiction of Connor's suicide and Connor himself as a character, because this movie doesn't understand fundamentally how suicide works.
Yes.
There's a bit where Alana's like, but in the emails, he said he was getting better and then he killed himself. That's not what people who kill themselves do. And it's like, well, actually, in fact, that is a lot of the time what happens is that when people actually finally decide to kill themselves, they seem more energetic and people think they're getting better because they finally have a committed action to get out. So like okay, I'm going to read this quote because Stephen Levinson, who wrote the book and adapted his own book for the screenplay for the movie, did an interview with Slate.com. In an interview entitled, "The writer of Dear Evan Hansen explains how a, quote, terrible idea for a musical, unquote, became a Tony Awards favorite," by Marissa Martinelli. And in it, she asks, "In the show, the tragedy isn't an accidental death, but the suicide of a teenager. In fact, the whole plot hinges on that one event and the lies and misunderstandings that follow. How did you decide to make that the catalyst for the story?" And Stephen Levinson responds, "I remember talking a lot about the way that Connor would die and why we felt it had to be a suicide. This was not our first idea. It took a while for this to emerge in the process. After years of working on it, we realized that Connor is, in a way, a stand-in for Evan. And vice versa. The two of them are actually facing many of the same issues. They're battling many of the same demons, and they just go different ways. That's how that became so central to the story of suicide and the idea of mental health, when we realized that it's about the desperate loneliness that both these young men feel. We never set out to write a musical about mental health issues or about suicide, but a lot of it just came into focus as we developed the characters more and got to know them."
So, Brendan, I'm seeing you shaking your head, doing a facepalm, etc.
Well, it's not a show about mental health. I mean, in no way is it a show about mental health. It's the first thing, like that Pasek said, like, I wanted to write a show about how people can sort of capitalize socially off someone else's tragedy. And that it feels like someone eventually halfway through writing told them, "Oh no, it's about mental health." And so they kind of threw this in and threw that in and threw that in, and they're like, it's about mental health. But you're using someone's suicide who we never get to meet or hear from honestly as the catalyst for your bullshit musical. If that person ever existed, you are doing the most harmful thing by writing the rest of this show.
One of the things that starts to happen in the movie World's Greatest Dad is, he's written this fake journal that his son did not keep to explain why his son committed suicide, which he didn't. He was jerking off and choking himself and died. In it, he becomes something. He ends up going on TV. He's being like he's being invited to speaking events. He keeps talking about. He becomes an advocate. He becomes like this well-known, aggrieved father of a suicidal youth who then becomes an anti-suicide activist.
And also, much like in Dear Evan Hansen, he is achieving romantic success as a result of this. Robin Williams' character is.
This attained a certain meta level because, of course, Robin Williams did kill himself. And for a long time, the narrative around Robin Williams' death was that he was a sort of Pagliacci, right? He was the depressed clown. He was the guy who made us all laugh because
secretly inside,
he was fighting demons all of his life. You'll just see it on the internet still all the time. They'll have this quote from Robin Williams.
"If you're that depressed, reach out to someone. And remember, suicide is a permanent solution to temporary problems."
Right? That's what Robin Williams said.
You will be found.
In the movie World's Greatest Dad, written and directed by Bobcat Goldthwait. Right? Because Robin Williams himself was suffering from a prion disease called Lewy body dementia that is a very, very quick decline in your neurological health, and it caused paranoia, and it caused him to kill himself. It had nothing to do with depression. It's amazing how that became like the main quote right after he died. People sharing the permanent solution to a temporary problem. Oh, wise words from Robin Williams. And some of them even have the screenshot from the movie where he's saying that line, which I think that scene is the one that ends with him because he's like on a news channel and he's talking. and then he just starts laughing.
Yeah, he can't hold it in anymore.
It looks like he's crying, but he's just laughing on live TV.
It's probably the darkest scene in the movie in terms of how cynical it gets, because he is having trouble holding back how much he knows what he is saying is bullshit. And he is finding it inherently funny, but he can't like say it because he's on TV and he needs to.
And it's such a weird, again, dissonance. It's such a weird thing because theater has so many people involved in it at a much higher rate who struggle with all kinds of mental illness, including every present party in this conversation. And yet whenever musical theater especially broaches this topic, whether it's this or fucking Next to Normal, it's a catastrophe.
Yeah.
It is horrific. Just the lack of understanding they have of any of this.
How dare you, like, if you're saying that Evan Hansen and Connor are the same person because they both you cannot, addiction and depression are two separate monsters. They might have some crossover, some bleed over, but they're not the fucking same.
Yeah.
So you can kind of go fuck yourself if that's the PR you're spinning for this.
Yeah, well, it's also like they didn't cut anything out from previous drafts. Like the whole Connor in rehab thing, you're like, wait, what? Why was he in rehab? Like, because he smoked pot? Was he in rehab for pot? Like, and it seems like there was an earlier version where it was a kid who died of a heroin overdose. And weirdly, a lot of the musical's problems aren't fixed, but are made better if Connor just dies of an accidental drug overdose that then maybe they like manipulate into being a suicide. So then like start capitalizing on that. In the current version, Connor is fucked up because he's a school shooter, right? Who doesn't take that route, but instead kills himself.
He's violent. He has rage issues. I mean, he's not really a school shooter. He's seen that way because nothing works for him. Whereas with Evan Hansen, he's able to go along with anything. He can go along with, but Connor can't ever fit into any of those circles. And so it's weird to see someone who wrote this show for like 6-7 years. And maybe this is part of the poison of writing a show for that many years. Like you just start to disconnect from it in some fundamental way.
Yeah.
Because like, no, they're not remotely similar. Just the little bit we see of him, he's a clearly different person from Evan Hansen.
Entirely. He doesn't, I mean, if he has anxiety, he has a much higher performative quality than Evan Hansen, because Evan Hansen can't hold a conversation. Like the boy is like has crippling anxiety.
But not when he sings. And
not when he sings.
Evan Hansen, you could take him and put him in How to Succeed and he would do so well.
Yeah.
He just, all he needs is a little push and then he just starts lying his little butt off. He has a way to get through the world, whereas Connor, it seems, doesn't.
The other thing is that like it doesn't really feel like a musical. It's a weird way to put it, but like for example, in the first two scenes there are two reprises of Waving Through a Window. So they do Waving Through a Window and then it's like 3 minutes of text and then it's a reprise of Waving Through a Window and then it's another minute of text and then it's another reprise of Waving Through a Window.
The motif from Waving Through a Window comes back at the very end too, when Evan is singing his fucking I Threw Myself Out of the Tree song.
Yeah.
It's that like idea that used to be in like pop music that you need to put your hit at the very top of the album.
Yeah.
And they did it and they were like, we know what our hit is. We know how catchy it is. We're just going to hammer it in for the first 15 minutes.
We're going to play 30 seconds of it while you wait to buy tickets from second stage.
There's something very interesting about the sort of historical moment that Dear Evan Hansen finds itself in, right? Because the play came out on Broadway and was pretty successful right before the pandemic hit. The pandemic happened, and then the movie got created and released during the pandemic. What does all of this tell us about the shape of entertainment toward young audiences, toward the way that we perceive mental health as a country, toward the way that we portray issues of mental health in our entertainment, and the way that that is going in the future? What does this all mean?
Broadway is back.
That's true.
I think just right off right off the thing. When I saw Dear Evan Hansen yesterday live, there was almost no one there. Is what I can say. It's not selling very well anymore.
Wait, I thought you watched a bootleg. You went to the actual theater?
Yes, I watched a bootleg and I also saw it.
I don't know why you do this to yourself.
I had to know. And the thing is,
literally no one asked, AJ.
No, I know. I did this on my own volition. But like the other thing the other thing I wanted to feel was how the sound was mixed, because a lot of like they crank up the bass to the point where you feel it.
Drum.
Yeah, you feel it in your chest. As you're watching the show. And so I feel like that also tricks people into feeling more, because it feels like the song is literally inside of you, and you feel yourself being like, yeah, sure, why not? And I think that there has been a major shift in terms of, that bullshit detector that Levinson was talking about. This idea that kids can smell bullshit from a mile away. And I think the fascinating thing about the release of Dear Evan Hansen, the movie, was that people outside of theater for the first time got like a glimpse into the story. They finally understood what Dear Evan Hansen was about, because they thought it was probably just another like Love Victor thing, where it's just like a story about, star-crossed like teenage lovers. A lot of people
did think it was about a gay kid, yeah.
And then they found out what the plot was and went, what the fuck? And it seemed like what I think happened was the movie actually poison-pilled the Broadway show, because what it did was people were watching it going, I don't want to fucking see that. Like, you could get tourists into the Broadway show and you play the bass so loud it gets inside them, they leave going, oh, that was a great show. But when they see the movie first, they're like, I don't want to see that on stage. I don't want to see a man puppeteered by an army of squirrels running about causing mischief on another family. That's just not... That just is not appealing anymore.
The actual music, it's all so fucking sad. Like the way that it's built, the way that it's written, it's all such, like there's not real much fun to be had in the show. So I'm like trying to figure out what songs the super fans are drawn to besides Waving Through a Window. And
I think that's it.
Only Us is very popular.
Yeah, that's true.
As a
people
love
like
duet.
Words Fair as well.
Yeah, and actually people really like.
I love the part in Dear Evan Hansen where they go to the World's Fair.
World's Fair.
Robert Moses is there.
Pan American Exposition.
It's the dawn of a new day.
People really like that I Will Sing No Requiem.
Yeah, they like
I
Requiem.
love that shit.
Yeah.
It just makes no sense. And maybe just being able to watch it personally on the screen where it's happening, you're able to really see that because like theater is fucking magic. When it's good, it's magic. And when it's passable, sometimes it still
feels magical.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if I go see like a show at the Delacorte, which is where they do Shakespeare in the Park for free and sometimes other musicals, I've never had a terrible, terrible experience because the show is free. Right. I've waited in line. It's a New York experience and it's magic, the show is magic. And so I'm guessing that there is,
Neil LaBute has basically built an entire career off of that. Like anytime Neil LaBute goes and makes another movie, everyone goes, what the fuck is going on? How does this guy have a job? And then he releases a new play and then everyone's like, another real head scratcher, another real thinker from America's leading iconoclast, Neil LaBute.
I also want to real quick then take it, and certainly the medium is an important thing. And, in a post-pandemic environment where the future of live theater is something that is very much in question, I think
Broadway is back.
I know that Broadway is back. But like I wonder too, like, looking at like national statistics about mental health, right? And about depression specifically, and about the way that it is very much on the rise. I'm looking at something from the Pew Research Center. In 2017, 13% of U.S. teenagers 12 to 17 said that they had experienced at least one major depressive episode in the past year, up from 8% in 2007. So we're having like a 5% uptick over the course of a decade. That's going to keep going up. And the reason that it's going up isn't because kids are so sad. It's because the material circumstances of the world around us are getting objectively worse every day. And that is something that Dear Evan Hansen doesn't understand either.
Right. The U.S. suicide rate is much lower on the whole than the big offenders, which are, China, Japan, and then Russia is way above all of them.
I know South Korea is really high too.
Has an absolute rocket of a suicide rate that the East Asian countries can't even compete with. But Japan at its peak, right around the time of the sort of late 90s Asian market failure that was already following a decade of decline in Japan. that peak, which they've gone much lower since, like especially 2010 and on, it's been dropping, was around, I think, 23 per 100,000. The suicide rate in the state of New Mexico, where I'm from, is higher than that.
Wow.
Fuck.
Right. New Mexico is a very poor state. It's a state that has a lot of Native American people in it. The suicide rate among Native Americans is unbelievable. There are material circumstances that are worth discussing in all of that. And this musical doesn't want to engage with fucking anything at all. Again, Next to Normal, which was the previous one that even got awards from certain like mental health foundations, which shows you how much the nonprofits are helping us.
Yeah. And also those same nonprofits were the ones interviewed for this musical. So.
Right. And Next to Normal ends with,
what happens if the cut, the burn, the break was never in my brain or in my blood, but in my soul.
you got a soul problem.
And then well, I'm just like, is there any musical that has existed that tackles mental health in a passable light? And was it successful, or do they just not exist? And should it even exist? Like, is it subject matter that can even be dealt in that media?
I think so. I think a lot of Sondheim shows, they're not about mental health, but like, you know, Not Getting Married Today is a panic attack on stage, which I think is probably the best anxiety portrayal I've seen in terms of just patter and in terms of the song. And it's funny as hell.
Right.
And then also, honestly, A Little Night Music, I think, deals with a lot of like the suicide stuff in a way that is more Chekhovianly funny, like just very darkly funny, but also like has characters come out the other side.
Yeah, I would point to Fun Home for that same reason.
Oh yeah, and Fun Home. Yeah.
Right, and Fun Home is also has the benefit of working off of something real.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. It's Bechdel's own life story. It's an autobiographical novel that she wrote.
So it is incredibly specific because of that.
But that's like the moment that still sticks with me from Fun Home after all these years. I didn't see it on Broadway. I saw it at the Public at the Newman before it went to Broadway. But the moment that still sticks with me after all these years is the song that Michael Cerveris sings before he fucking kills himself by, standing in the middle of a highway.
At certain times of day, I see how fine this house could be. I see it so damn clear. Oh my God, why am I standing here?
It's like you feel in that moment every single part of who he is and what he is dealing with. And it is something that is tied up both in his personal conditions and his material conditions, because that's what really happens when you're depressed.
I think like part of the success of these examples is that none of them tried to answer anything. And I think Dear Evan Hansen and Next to Normal both, even though they didn't try to solve mental health, but they tried to put a little like
I think Next to Normal did try to solve mental health.
I think Next to Normal did solve mental health.
Yeah, no, we're good now. That's why Dear Evan Hansen is redundant.
That's why Alice. That's why Alice Ripley ended up being such a well-adjusted person.
Like, don't look that up. Don't look that up.
Don't look it up.
Do not look up Alice Ripley female teenagers. Don't do it.
And I think what Dear Evan Hansen, to bring it back to this, is what they thought they were doing is they thought they were ending on a question mark, and they decidedly weren't. They didn't. They left it on a question mark of like, maybe like I'll be okay, but will I? But like they had sort of buttoned up the mental health sort of issue.
I think the last piece that is oddly missing from Dear Evan Hansen, which is, when I say oddly, I mean it's very odd, because the whole thing takes place, at least on stage, in sort of a cyberspace type environment with social media. He doesn't actually understand the effect of like social media at all.
Oh, no.
And
his understanding of the internet is very dumb.
We could keep talking about that all day, but I guess the point that I want to make with that is that that's just one more material condition that it completely swings and misses on. When we look at depression and we look at rates of depression among teenagers, it's disproportionately higher among girls. And a big part of that is due to the fact that like the body image and the presentation of like who people are on like TikTok is completely fucking unattainable. And so we are heading toward this future where the presentation of the self in many ways is a lot more important than the actual self. It has very little to do with this Dear Evan Hansen idea of like, well, if you just let the real version of yourself show through, you will be found. That's not real. And I find it so incredibly frustrating that this show in many ways is being treated and has been treated as this really beautiful, uplifting, forward-moving way for people to, and especially for teenagers, for adolescents, to think about their true selves. This isn't about your true self. This is about creating a persona that destroys the world around you, and yet for some reason you get forgiveness. And I think that's fucking unconscionable.
Yes, agreed.
Anyway,
absolutely.
Brendan, thank you so much for coming on and, talking with us today about Dear Evan Hansen.
Terrific, gripping, and heartfelt with a gorgeously melodic score by Benj Basic.
Is there anything that you would like to plug or talk about that you have going on or coming up?
I have nothing happening.
Are you still selling that record?
Oh yeah, I got a Lord of the Rings Christmas parody album called Christmas in Middle Earth,
and it rules. I have it right over there. I'd get up, but I can't.
Hey there, Mr. Samwise, don't you think that we've been good? Haven't tried to kill you since we passed those woods. So you cook your potatoes, but we won't be eating lunch unless you're cooking something with a 24-karat golden crown.
Very silly parody album that I probably don't have the rights to have made, and I made it. And you can find it on Spotify and Apple Music, and you can get a vinyl pressing if you want.
You can catch Brendan Dalton in Dickinson in a guest starring role.
That's true.
And as Josh was about to say, recently Brendan was off Broadway. In Tambo and Bones, which is now running in LA, I believe.
It is for 9 more shows or 9 more days at Center Theater Group.
Yeah.
I'm not in this iteration, but you should still go see it if you're on the West Coast, because it is one of my favorite plays I've ever encountered, and I love everyone involved. That's it. Oh, and then if anybody wants an audio editor, I'm available.
Or a theme song.
Or a theme song. I write theme songs too. Or a jingle. Or if
you heard it performed live at the top of this very episode. Our theme song
and mixed really well with the actual theme song played over it. It was beautiful.
Oh, and I'm fostering a dog right now. If there's anybody out there looking for a new companion, her name given to her was Fendi, but we don't like that. She looks more like a fern. But she's a 35-pound terrier mix. And she's adorable. She's about 11 months old, and she's a sweet little lamb. So anybody looking to get a dog?
Just wander around wherever Brendan lives and just scream, "I want the dog!"
Or go to Hearts and Bones, their Instagram or their website. And you can see all the wonderful animals
Hearts
that
and
they have.
Bones, Tambo and Bones.
Tambo and Bones.
Is there anything you do that doesn't involve a skeleton?
My next project is called Bones and Bones. It's a dissection of myself, but it's literal.
Oh, no.
Pornographic. It'll be my final performance.
You're going to kill yourself live on stage?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, but it's all for the all for the kids.
And that, folks, is how you do a suicide joke.
Yeah. Josh, you talked earlier about what like the future of like covering mental health will be in the American theater. And I think all I really have to say about it is that I hope that whatever comes next deals with the subjects of anxiety and suicide and depression with more nuance than the waving through a window and you will be found Ben platitudes that we get from Dear Evan Hansen. I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
And I'm the worst of all possible Joshes.
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
folks, that sure was something, huh? Thanks again to Brendan Dalton, the author of our theme song, for being our guest this week. You can check out his work over at his website, which we have linked in the description below on this episode and on every episode, because he wrote our theme song. Of course, now is the time to give thanks to our new $5 patrons: Laura, Emilia Uranga III, Stefan Mosignac, Trevor, Emma Peterson, Nathan Sanders, and Marcy. We hope you stay a while. And of course, our very special, regular, weekly thank yous to our $10 patrons, who are Annette Alford, I Hate Brian Alflord, Nathan Woods, Katie Wall, Alexa Valentine, John Johnson, Silverbear 909, Dara Swisher, Wallace Sean DeLand, Rosie Armstrong, Tony Diddy, Hannah White, Timmy Sexton, Ashley Stoneman, and Nikola Donov. Have a good one.
So many possible worlds, and we got this one. So many possible worlds, and we got this one. Hey, how's it going? Great. Hi. Oh.